Welcome to the ABC's election night coverage from the ABC Election Centre at the studios in South Brisbane. So many ways to tap into our coverage tonight on ABC TV around Queensland, listening on local radio, around the nation on the news channel, and of course on our Facebook page. Thanks for your company. I'm Matt Wordsworth.
And I'm Jessica Van Vonderen, and I'd like to welcome Jane Prentice to the panel, Federal Liberal MP. We're very keen to get your thoughts in just a moment, but we're actually going to cross to Anthony first. It's 8:30 in Queensland, 52% of the vote counted. Anthony, give us a state of play.
It's one of the more complex elections I've worked on. So I remember 98, it was damned hard, and this one's almost as hard in parts of country Queensland. Again, let's look at that primary vote. It's still sticking there, 36, 33, 13, 10. Those numbers seem to have stabilised at that figure. And the change in vote, slight drop in the Labor vote, big drop in the LNP, and an increase in One Nation. If I look at, I just thought I'd have a look at some of the seats changing. We've said Labor's gained Aspley. We think they've gained Bonnie. The LNP has definitely regained Buderim. Bundaberg's looks like an LNP gain. Burdekin, I've got him as an LNP gain there. The three candidates are within 2% of each other. So impossible. And the funny thing about Burdekin is you need to know where the polling place is from. Murrumbidgee votes 70% Labor, so I haven't checked whether that's in or not. Labor's gained Cairns from Rob Pine, and it looks like Labor's gained Redlands. So that's the current seats, and we've got seats in doubt. We've got Lost Gaven, Hinchinbrook, McAllister, Maywar, which I'm still living in doubt. Maryborough, the Labor Party's done much better in Maryborough on first preferences than they did last time. The results are very patchy, and so I think Maryborough is probably the most encouraging one for Labor outside of the southeast. But in the rest of rural and regional Queensland, it's very difficult. I think Labor might hold Mundingborough, but the numbers are quite complex to watch. Let me have another look at Chamber, which is always nice to look at. As I said, we've been changing a few results which we think are actually a little bit precipitous. We're now giving Labor a definite 42 seats, 38 for the LNP, 2 for Cadda. And we're giving a few more likelies, so we're still getting Labor up to 46. I'm still not convinced about that. The one thing also is there's a range of LNP members in Scenic Rim, in Lockyer, in Gympie, who will be very glad at Labor's preferences deals, because all of them decision to put the LNP first, because all of those would be in a great deal of difficulty if it wasn't for that decision. So the LNP figure is boosted by Labor's preferences in a number of seats, which is the weirdness of this election, that it's who's finishing third. It's the bronze medalist determining who gets silver and gold.
Thanks, Anthony. Well, we're going to cross back to Barry Cassidy from Insiders. Barry, Anthony Green saying it's pretty weird. Is that your assessment too?
That's right.
Yes, but I think one thing you can say, it's a very poor result for the LNP when you can't knock over a minority government and you get an 8% swing against you. That is not a good result. And the problem is this, that One Nation got 12% of the vote, but 88% of people didn't vote for One Nation. And they saw a situation where LNP were flirting with One Nation. They were giving them a certain legitimacy. And in the end, I think the great majority of those 88% who didn't vote for One Nation took the view, well, they didn't want to run the risk of One Nation having some sort of involvement, whatever it might be, but some sort of involvement in the government. And so they went for the stability. That was the line that the Labor Party ran in the last week. They went for the stability of a Labor government. That's the way it seems to be shaping up.
Yes, and you were saying earlier that you were particularly keen to see how One Nation would fare, and at this stage we're saying not a single seat to that party. So in terms of federal implications, any message there?
Well, what it tells you is the LNP is a greater threat. The One Nation is a greater threat to LNP than to Labor, because when you see where the One Nation pick up 12% of the vote, the LNP lose 8%. You know where that 8% went. So it's a problem, and for the LNP more than it is for Labor, and because the LNP shed more votes to One Nation, and then when the preferences come back, they're pretty much shared. Then of course that's the case, that the LNP has more to lose.
Barry, thank you for your insights. We don't want to keep you up too much longer because we know you're on air at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Who are your guests?
Well, one of the guests is sitting right there. Matt Canavan will be there representing the LNP. And Wayne Swan, former Treasurer Wayne Swan, will be there with the Labor Party perspective.
Barry Cassidy, thank you.
Let's check in with some more results from Anthony Green. Anthony, let's start with McAllister.
I've got to use the mouse. I keep forgetting. Melissa McMahon. Now, this is based on Beenleigh. It's sort of a good... It's got the Labor end of Albert plus surrounding areas. Judy Van Manen's the wife of the federal Liberal MP down there, but Hetty Johnson, the anti-child abuse campaigner, has got 23%. She does well with preferences from the other parties, and the Greens have lifted her before Labor. So if that gap closes there, then Hetty Johnson would have a chance of causing quite an upset. But the more I think about it, she will not do well with absent votes. She will not do well with the pre-poll votes. So that was an interesting result I was watching for. But I think probably Melissa McMahon will go on to win that seat. But that was interesting to see. If we look at Barron River, which is the next seat, Craig Crawford, who defeated Michael Trout, who was the one-term LNP member, 34 to 30. Again, you're seeing a big vote there with One Nation, and the Greens, their traditional 13%, traditional 12 or 13%. The Green preferences will get Labor over the line there. We do have a preference count, and it's predicting that there's a 1.5% swing to the LNP, but the Labor Party will retain it. So it looks like they will hold Barron River despite that big fall in their vote. On the other side of Cairns, in Mulgrave, Curtis Pitt has no difficulties. He's got 51.5 up against 21 for the LNP, 20% for One Nation, and the Greens 7. So if he's got over 50% of the first preference vote, Curtis Pitt's easily elected. Mulgrave was won by One Nation in 98, but it's a substantially different seat. It's moved up into the suburbs of Cairns with the creation of Hill to the south, so that's been held by the Labor Party. And Cairns is a Labor gain. Robert Pine, the Labor candidate who won it last time and then became an independent, he's in third place. We do have a Labor versus LNP preference count, and the preferences are flowing to Michael Healy, and he will go on to be the new Labor member for the seat. He's got a small swing towards the LNP after preferences, but Michael Healy will win that seat. And I think that's the last of the seats. But that's that wrap of those North Cairns. There's slightly better for One Nation in Barron River, but it looks like the far north Queensland Labor's hold. It's sort of further south around Townsville they've had problems.
Thanks, Anthony. Well, Jane Prentice, this is the first opportunity we've had to hear from you tonight. I assume you've been watching very closely. Your reaction, firstly?
I'm surprised at some of the results. I've been around all the Ryan state seats during the day. So I started up in Ferny Grove, where I thought Nick Elston would do better. He's campaigned incredibly hard over the last few months and had a very strong local following. And then, of course, Cooper with Kate Jones. And then Maywar. I don't think we should ever write off Maywar. I think, with up to 30% pre-poll and postal votes, I think that I think Scotty will hold that. And of course, Christian Rowan out in Moggle, which was a strong hold, and Tim Mander, who's done well as well. So it's interesting. There wasn't a lot of feeling out there. It was quite calm, except in Maywar, where there was, I think, the ALP and the Greens were sort of outnumbering us 7. They sort of had rent-a-worker. It was about 7 to 1 out there. So it's been pretty tough for quite a few weeks now.
Yeah, the southeast trend, a bit of a concern tonight.
Yes, I think so. But I mean, it's a bit lumpy, isn't it? In some places it's good, in other places it's not. I mean, we just saw Judy Van Manen down there in McAllister, and she's a great local. I mean, she was born there, she grew up there. It'll be interesting to see where the preferences go. I mean, not all voters follow the ticket. People who know her might vote for their, Hetty first, but they might give their preference to Judy next.
Look, no election has a uniform swing across the whole state, across every electorate. It's always sort of lumpy, but this one does seem a little bit different. So what's the source of all of this inconsistency?
Well, normally in a state election it'd be some local issues, and as we said, sort of the Adani issues seem to play differently in the regions to southeast Queensland. But you saw Leanne Donaldson, the Labor candidate, who said she was losing because she thought people, had jobs as an issue. Well, we're the party offering jobs. Federally, we're the party delivering jobs, and yet that hasn't translated in votes in southeast Queensland. What
message are you taking from it, if anything, at this stage?
Well, it's a bit early, so I think we do need to analyse it a lot. I think it's probably too early to call a lot of the seats. I'm getting feedback from some of our scrutineers, and they're saying, the challenge in many seats in southeast Queensland will be whether the Greens get in ahead of Labor. That's going to be a major difference in how that seat ends up, of course.
You mentioned Ferny Grove. We haven't got the results in or the figures in from Ferny Grove yet. It was sort of the big seat, the last seat last election. It's an ALP seat, so you think that it might be retained?
It was ALP by 5%. I mean, Nick had a hard job, but he campaigned really well and had an incredibly high profile. He door-knocked more than half the seat, and the feedback that I got on the booths today was incredibly positive for him. So I thought that would have been a bit closer than it has been so far.
All right, Stephen Miles, I just want to ask you a quick question, because we heard Anthony say before Labor will get more seats, but not clear if they can get a majority. So what does that do to if you've got a hung parliament? Anastasia Palaszczuk said no deals.
Well, our commitment was very clear that there will be no deals with One Nation. The LNP strategy all along has been to count on One Nation to get them those extra seats. So if that's what the final result count looks like, you may well have the chaos you might expect from a Nichols One Nation coalition. But I think the other thing to observe here is essentially the LNP strategy was to gamble southeast seats on issues that were controversial in the southeast but they thought would be popular in the regions. You've seen a 16% swing, negative swing on the LNP primary vote in Townsville, the very place they expected these kinds of policies to be popular. So both of those strategies are backfired.
But just if you get to 46, you need to get to 47, you need one vote to become government, you're not even interested in, it's not going to happen. You're going to rule that out right now.
I think there are, yes, we have ruled it out, and there are plenty of scenarios that get us to 47 that we're at. Anthony has us at 41 at the moment. There are 12 up for grabs. There are lots of seats we're picking up. There's not many seats that the LNP is picking up, and we can maybe see one that One Nation will win. So I think it's a lot easier for us to get to 47 without a coalition than it is for the LNP to get to 47 even with a coalition.
The reality is, Matt, right now, as it stands on Anthony's calculator, with the two Katter Party seats, who represent Conservative electorates, the LNP plus Katter's at 40, the ALP's at 41, and there's 12 seats in doubt. This is very close, and look, it's a very strong statement from Stephen that he won't enter into coalition. I don't believe a word of it, because it's exactly what they said 3 years ago, and then guess what they did? Entered into a coalition to form government. But this is very close, and this is not an endorsement of the Labor Party government. If the electorate wanted to endorse a sitting first-term government, they would have given them a clear majority to get on with the job.
All right, we might have an accidental premier 2 times around. Well, let's get the latest on the social media feedback from Louisa Rebgetz.
Well, Matt, there's been a bit of activity on Twitter, obviously, tonight, and we're just going to have a look at some of the tweets that have been trending. Malcolm Roberts has been trending since news of that he will not be successful in the Ipswich campaign. So many tweets like this have been going viral on the internet so far tonight. A lot of congratulations from the Labor camp, a lot of tweets like this one, Kate Jones being congratulated for winning Cooper. So that's circulating a lot on Twitter as well. We're also seeing some tweets from earlier today and earlier during the election campaign. One LNP supporter decided to rip down some Labor bunting in Clayfield in Tim Nichols' seat. So that video also got a lot of retweets, 238 retweets. Now, we're just going to go back to earlier in the campaign, and you'll see Tim Nichols, he did a lot of stunts during this campaign, this being one of them, the roller coaster ride, which then you end up getting memes. So his camp did decide to turn this shot of Tim Nichols on this roller coaster into a meme when you open your power bill under a Labor government. But sometimes this really backfires for these politicians, because the other side can also do the same thing. And this also circulated a lot during the campaign when you imagine Malcolm Roberts in your cabinet. So interesting tactics there from both sides. We're also having a bit of a shout out to those people watching on iView tonight across Australia. This person in Perth, Kale Black, thanks for watching. They're having dinner and watching on their phone on iView. So we'll be back a little bit later in the program with some more stuff on Twitter.
Thanks, Louisa, and good to have your company everywhere around Queensland and, of course, around the country on the ABC News channel. We're going to take another look now at South Brisbane because that was a very interesting contest. Jackie Trad, the Deputy Premier.
And at this stage, the Greens are in first place by 17 votes there, as you can see. They're on 36.9 to 36.8 with the LNP on 21, just under 21. Remember, the LNP recommended preferences for Labor in this electorate, and that certainly seems to be what the majority of voters have done. If we look at the change in vote first, swing from both of the major parties towards the Greens. But when we look at the two-party preferred, there is a substantial swing, but at this stage, it looks like it still has Jackie Trad ahead. So those preferences from the LNP may save Jackie Trad. That decision there has probably sunk the Greens. More counting to come, and there is, as I said, some significant changes to the polling places in that electorate, and there's also usually a huge Brisbane City Hall count and usually a big pre-poll count.
Thanks, Anthony. Well, let's go upstairs because the Greens candidate in South Brisbane, Amy McMahon, is standing by to chat with Emma Griffiths.
Amy McMahon, seeing that run through of the seat in the latest count, what do you think?
Yeah, look, a bloody amazing swing to the Greens. Incredible. Such a testament to the big team of volunteers we've had on the ground door knocking for the past 12 months. And it's looking pretty close, but regardless of the outcome, this has been a huge swing. And
yet not enough.
And yet not enough, yeah. And a huge swing to the Greens across the state as well. I think the party has never been in a stronger position, and we're going to be heading into future elections in a really strong position.
And yet not enough in South Brisbane because the Greens, you really pumped all your resources or the bulk of your resources into trying to wrest that seat from Jackie Trad. So what's gone wrong?
Oh, look, we always knew this was going to be tough, going up against the Deputy Premier, going up against the Labor Party with their, huge amounts of resources and people on the ground and the benefit of being a sitting MP as well, a lot of name recognition, but still a 14% swing. And I think we should be really proud. What
about so there's a couple of other Brisbane seats, McConnell against Grace, but the one that Anthony Green in particular is watching tonight is Maiwar, where Scott Emerson looks like he's in trouble against either the Greens candidate Michael Berkman or Labor. What do you think is going to happen there?
Oh, look, I'm hopeful for Michael Berkman to edge over the line. He's also been running an incredible grassroots campaign, but we always knew this was going to be tight. But I think, this is just incredible outcomes for the Greens across the board. We are the major challenge in these three key seats. It's now, the Greens are in there with two-party preferred in these three key seats. And in the coming elections, it's very likely that we'll be picking up these seats.
On Adani, so if Labor gets in, and Anthony Lynham was in earlier and talking about the future of Adani, there's no stopping it now, isn't there? Is the best you can do is hope that it will fail, that it will not get the funding it needs to proceed?
There's definitely the funding, but what we cannot underestimate is the huge social movement that is mobilising against Adani. We know the majority of Queenslanders do not want this project to go ahead. We know they do not want public money going to this, and they know that we can be doing so much better than a coal mining.
So what are you suggesting then when you're talking about a social movement? Are you talking protesters
as
chaining themselves to things? What are you talking about?
Potentially direct action, but we've seen the social movements mobilising around the country against Adani. People cannot believe that this project has even gotten this far and that a Labor government would entertain the thought of opening up the biggest coal mine in the world, when everyone else in the world is on the brink of transitioning to renewable energy. We're the Sunshine State. People are looking at Queensland with shame. And I think the big swings that we've seen to the Greens across Queensland this election should be a very clear message to the Labor Party that this is not on, that people do not want this mine to go ahead, and there are much better things we could be doing to be helping communities up north and to be creating jobs and prosperity.
Amy McMahon, thanks very much for your time.
Wow, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Let's go to some more figures. We're going to head straight up to far north Queensland to the seat of Cook, where the independent MP, Billy Gordon, is not recontesting the seat.
Look, this is a seat you would have expected Labor to win. Cynthia Liu is not, but she's only on 32% of the vote. One Nation, 21.2, LNP, 19.8, Canada's Australia Party, 19.8. The Green preferences should help Labor, but this is going to depend on the order these three candidates drop out. If the LNP drops to 4, if Canada finishes fourth, it will help One Nation. If the LNP finishes fourth, it will help Canada's Australian Party. But either way, the Labor Party will have great difficulty holding the seat on those numbers. I haven't seen it. It's impossible to know. We'll have to wait for all the votes to be in that election. There's still some of the Thursday Island booths to come. Some of the Torres Strait Islander booths, which you'd expect to be better for Cynthia Liu. But that's a quite remarkable result, as is Burdekin. Look at that. There's three candidates between 32 and 33%. Labor will be one. Look, the Greens you expect will keep Labor ahead of One Nation, and you have to go and look at which booths are in, because those figures will bob up and down depending on what's counted. But that is an extraordinarily tight race, and I don't think we've got any chance of knowing the result there tonight. And Callide is also fascinating. This is one where Colin Boyce will be saved by Labor's preference decision, because the Labor preferences will heavily favour LNP, assuming they got their how-to-vote cards. Of course, if there isn't a strong flow, that will be slightly tougher for the LNP, because Canada's Australia Party preferences will probably flow to Sharon Losey from the One Nation. So we'll be watching that for a long time. And then we have Nanango, Deb Freckleton. She will win. One Nation's in second spot, and Labor's preferences will ensure she wins. She's got close enough to 50% to be fine. And then back north to Hinchinbrook, and another one of those seats where you've got to try and figure out what's going on. My guess is that Canada's Australia Party would have a good chance of winning that seat on those numbers. Okay. It's very difficult to work out. Marcus Rowell, who was Andrew Cripps' predecessor in the Hinchinbrook, once, I think, twice won from under 30%. And I think Andrew Cripps might be having to do the same thing if he wants to win Hinchinbrook. But again, this is a different electorate than it used to be, because it comes into the northern suburbs of Townsville now. So again, that's a very difficult seat to call. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Anthony. Anthony Chisholm, can I just start with you? Cook, Anthony's saying there that it looks like it's difficult for you to win. Is that your assessment?
Oh, look, you'd prefer our primary vote to be higher. It's down in the low 30s, so obviously you'd want to be closer to 40. I wouldn't completely rule it out. I think that we're in with a strong chance.
That was one you guys put in the bank, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were optimistic about the Cairns seats, and probably Cook's a lot closer than we would have hoped, and Barron River, which I think will win, but is a bit tighter than what we'd imagined. So more of a focus from our point of view was on the Townsville seats, which we're ahead in, but are still pretty tight in Thurungowa, Munningburra and Townsville.
Matt Canavan, Burdekin, you can throw a blanket over the three.
Yeah, you can. That's a fascinating result. But it will be if the Labor Party get it, it will be because One Nation preference Labor in that seat.
Well, Sam Cox was one of your MPs. So was that a mistake?
Well, it wasn't our decision. It was Sam's decision. To preference Labor Party. He preferenced Labor Party despite the fact that they...
But he's a former LNP MP,
Yeah, well, that's right. But Sam split the sheets with us and decided to go his own way. And his preference against or for a party that is against cane growers has taken the side of Wilmar up there, a multinational sugar miller. It's disappointing that he did that, but I'm expecting, though, in that seat, at least if the booths are in the sugar areas that Anthony was talking about, a lot of people will not follow the how-to-vote card that Sam Cox and One Nation put out because there's no way, unless hell freezed over, that cane growers would preference the Labor Party after what they've done to them the last few years.
Let's move away from regional Queensland and go back down into the southeast corner and to the seat of Logan, which is south of Brisbane. The ALP's Linus Power has been the MP there since 2015.
And we're seeing he's up against Gloria Vicario from the LNP, but his main opponent is Scott Bannon from One Nation. There's the first preference votes. I suspect, I'm reasonably sure Linus Power is probably far enough ahead there to survive the challenge is 43. It's a bit of a run to run down there. You need very strong. I think Linus Power will win from there.
Preferences.
The LNP preferences are, of course, towards Labor in this electorate, and we have a preference count. And when we look at the swing that's occurring there, the swing is actually quite safe because of the LNP preferences. There's a swing of 3.5% there, and Linus Power will retain Logan, the seat that he won at the last election after an unsuccessful run in 2012.
And he joins us now. Linus Power, you'll be happy to hear that?
No, I'm really excited. It's fantastic news. Logan is going to stay Labor, and that's really exciting.
This is a seat with I suppose, a proud Labor tradition. Wayne Goss held the seat, the former Speaker, John McKell. Did you expect to continue that tonight? The polling was suggesting One Nation could poll strongly, and indeed they have.
Well, I took nothing for granted, and what we have is a really growing area, and what we put forward was a positive plan for services in a growing area, and really importantly, backed by the Premier. And that meant that they knew that when the Premier backs it, that their services would be delivered. And that's why we actually got a good result today, and that's why we're proud of it.
What's your number one priority for the area?
Well, it's about continuing to fund our roads resources and our educational resources. I want to continue to fight for the Mount Lindesay Highway, the Waterford Tambourine. The other thing that's really exciting, and I know everyone behind me is excited about the delivery of the Yarrabelba High School in the coming years, because that's something that everyone really values in the Logan Village Yarrabelba area.
Linus Power, thank you for your time tonight. I'll let you get back to your celebrations.
Well, thank you, and we really are celebrating here. Thanks.
Welcome back to Queensland Votes. We're taking you around the state tonight. This is Townsville, a major far north Queensland hub as seen from Castle Hill, and a crucial battleground in deciding who's going to be Premier this evening. Thank you for your company. I'm Jessica Van Vonderen.
I'm Matt Wordsworth. We're approaching 9 p.m, but doesn't seem like we're any clearer on who's going to win this election. Let's get the latest figures from our election analyst, Anthony Green.
Let's look at this again. Still staying on those figures, 36 to 33, 13, 10. Very little change now. It's stabilising. The question is whether that will change once we start to get the big pre-poll votes and and the like. The change of votes the same. Let me have a look at some slightly different trends this time. Let me look at, I think I've got Greater Brisbane here. The Labor Party on 43, the LNP 30, One Nation on 8, and 13%. If I look at the change in vote that's occurring in Brisbane itself, most of it, again, is switches from the LNP to One Nation. That other vote is clearly not correct. But if we look at the two-party preferred swing that's going in, there's 3% towards Labor in Greater Brisbane. On the Gold Coast, we're seeing a 2% swing to Labor. And on the Sunshine Coast, we're seeing a 0.7% swing to Labor. But in regional Queensland, 1.6% towards the LNP, but a very patchy swing because it's broken up all over the place depending on what order candidates are finishing. So as all the polls indicated and everyone who was analysing beforehand suggested, there's two elections going on here. One is in southeast Queensland. There's a swing to Labor and they're gaining seats. And there's a swing in the rest of the state, which is quite different. I just had a look at Palmerston, which is a bit tighter than I expected as well. Labor's on about 37% first preferences. If there's any strong flow of One Nation preferences, then Palmerston's would be in trouble as well. It's sort of a seat held by Rick Williams, the independent. So there's a lot of this sort of thing going on. I'll have a look at the seats, which I'm definitely... Oh, sorry, is that the seat? These are the seats I'm definitely listing as changing. Aspley has been won by Labor, Buderin by the LNP from One Nation. Bundaberg's an LNP gain. Cairns is a Labor gain, and Redlands is a Labor gain. Some of those seats I had on the Gold Coast, Bonnie and the like, are looking more doubtful. I have problems with my final figures during tonight for Bonnie, for Gavin and for Theodore. They are basically new seats. It was impossible to come up with an estimate of what the pre-poll vote might look like. If any pre-poll votes come in, it's going to interfere with my calculated swing. As I said earlier, the preference flows, the redistribution, the reintroduction of compulsory preferential voting has made this very difficult to call as an election. It's one of the most complex I've worked on.
Anthony Chisholm, do you think we're going to know tonight?
I still think there's a chance to know. We're confident in those Townsville seats, but the regional ones are very, very hard to predict. So until we get some of those pre-poll figures through. But I did just want to touch on one of the federal issues in this, and that's looking at the federal seat of Capricornia, which Matt knows well. It's a disastrous result for the LNP in that area. So they've come third in Keppel, they've come fourth in Rockhampton, and they've come third in Morenni. So the three key state seats that make up Capricornia, the LNP haven't even run second in. So I think that just shows you the damage that's been done from an LNP point of view when you look at some of these results on federal seats.
Matt Canavan?
Well, yet still in regional Queensland, the LNP has had a significant swing to it on two-party preferred terms, and that's keeping this race very alive. I mean, this is increasingly looking like a rejection of the Queensland Premier's call for stability. She went out there last week and said, please give us a majority government, and the Queensland people clearly look like they have not done that. I don't think we're going to know tonight. The Labor Party is still 7 seats away, and as you've seen from a lot of those results, it is all over the shop. It's going to be very hard to sell this evening.
Well, yeah, the ABC election computer has been a bit up and down in the seats that it's giving away. Jane Prentice, what are your thoughts on the summary that Anthony's just given us?
I think it'll be quite a few days before we actually have the real result. There's some interesting results in. I'm told Spring would be an interesting one to look at as well, I mean, I'm still confident in Maiwar, I have to tell you, as a local, and you know, I didn't expect necessarily Mount Omni to go because we've sort of held that against the tide in the past, so. You know, it's very difficult to judge, as Anthony says. The early booths are the small ones, so you just need one really big one to come in late and it can completely change what the result is.
Stephen Miles, just back to Matt Canavan's point before about, you know, we still can't say whether Labor has a majority that you asked for or not. It does look like the Catters are getting 2 seats at least. Was back to the point we were raising earlier, was the Premier too quick to say no deals with anyone? And given that she said that, will it have to be someone else from the ALP to lead if it does come up with this hung parliament situation?
I don't think we'll see that at all, Jess. It was important that we went to this election with a principled position, a very strong principled position, and we will maintain that position. But we keep seeing what are very, very bad results for the LNP. And so I think the question you raised earlier about who the potential leader is from here, Deb was careful to sidestep that, but she's really the only contender that doesn't carry all of that same baggage as Tim Nicholls does as a minister in the former Newman government. So there are big questions, I think, for the LNP on that leadership. Also on whether the merger of the Liberals and the Nationals is still a good idea. With compulsory preferences, it doesn't have the same strategic importance that it did, and what you've seen here is the Liberal vote collapse in the southeast and the National vote collapse in the regions, largely going to One Nation. So I think there are a lot of big questions there. We are the only party on these numbers that could get to majority government in any way, in our own right. So let's keep watching the count.
All right, well, Stephen Miles, let's go to one of your colleagues now and to central Queensland and the seat of Morenni. Jim Pearce is the sitting MP there. He's standing by to talk to us. Anthony Green, talk us through the figures first.
This is another one of these complex contests. Now, if you look at the first preferences, Jim Pearce is 6578, 37.2, One Nation 31.8, the LNP 26.7. Now we're getting a Labor LNP count in this electorate, which is a bit difficult. The Labor vote's basically the same. The LNP vote has slipped to third place. One Nation is up to 31.8. And what you're seeing there is a change in the way the preferences are going with the LNP. That's very difficult. I think that's my estimate. Jim Pearce might have better figures than me, but at this stage, that's looked very bad for him. And One Nation are definitely ahead in Morenni on these figures.
Thanks, Anthony. Jim Pearce, do you have better figures than Anthony Green?
No, I don't have better figures, but yeah, thanks for the news, Anthony.
I'm sure it's not the first time that he's been bearer of news that a candidate might not wish to hear. Is that your assessment? Was this a concern for you that Morenni would be difficult to hold on to?
Yeah, so look, I knew it was always going to be close. Simply, I lost the coal towns of Dysart, Middlemount and Glendon, which was always going to have an impact. I think the other factor we have to take into consideration as well, this is the first time that this seat has been in Labor hands for nearly 60 years, and so the mix was always there to make it very difficult for me to win at this election. So. But we've been in there. I've had a fantastic team behind me here. They've been in and give me an enormous amount of support, and all we can do is do the work that we have to do. And I'm in a position now where I have to wait till the numbers appear on the board. And sometimes they say you can win by a nose, but I tell you what, if I can win by a nose, it'll be a good distance when you check me out.
Jim Pearce, you've had a long history in politics, but you're also a miner by trade. How did the Premier's call to veto the Adani loan go down in your electorate?
Oh, look, let's not make any mistake on Adani. Adani has a responsibility if they want to operate and take coal in this country, and they talk about a big project, you know, they've got to put the money on the table. I think it's just wrong for any company to expect taxpayers to put their hand in their pocket to pay for a project that the company itself keeps talking about as one of the best things that can happen to the country. But let's put your money on the bloody table, guys. No mucking around. And I think it's made it very difficult for us at this election. But I've always been on about jobs for people. We've got youth unemployment. We've got labour hire companies who are the biggest crooks in the world, and we've got fly-in, fly-outs had a big impact on the region, and my heart's out there for those people who want a job. Young people in particular are not getting any consideration and for permanent work. I spoke to a young woman the other day, $18 an hour she's being paid by a labour hire company, and I was looking forward to getting back in there because I was going after that guy if he wants to treat his workers like that, because that's not the way to go.
Is this why voters in the electorate seem to be parking their vote with One Nation? Over 31% that they were polling, according to the figures Anthony brought up before.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, the 31%. That's my understanding. Yes.
Yeah. So the reasons behind that, I guess, is what I'm asking. You were talking about the unemployment.
Oh, yeah.
Is it that sort of disenchantment with the major parties about the way that they've dealt with those, you know, really bread and butter issues?
Well, I think it goes a bit deeper than that. We've got the performance of politicians in Canberra at the moment, and in some cases here in Queensland, the performance of some politicians, especially sitting on the LNP side of Parliament, has been disgraceful. The tactics that they want to enforce on people like myself. This was the dirtiest campaign personally that I've had in all my time in Parliament.
In what way, Jim Pearce?
Those LNP members that are sitting around, they know their friend the Courier Mail and the LNP members in Parliament started an attack on decent, fair income, down-to-earth workers in central Queensland, impacting on families. Families that I know that some husbands are very upset because of the way that they've been attacked, and I am their representative. I represent Central Queensland, and I'm not happy about that. And when I went to defend those workers, we had this bloody bullshit and crap that came out from LNP, and it was absolutely disgraceful. And I'm embarrassed that I actually sit in Parliament with members of Parliament who are supposed to respect the citizens that they represent.
You've had over 20 years in politics now. If you don't hang on there in Morani tonight, is this the end for you?
I think the age is sort of starting to creep up on me. I went out of politics and retired. I came back simply to try and deal with fly-in, fly-out workforces and the damage it was doing to Central Queensland. I've been successful in doing that with the help of my colleagues in getting legislation in that stops fly-in, fly-out, 100% fly-in, fly-out. But the labour hire issue is the big one at the moment, and I'm just so sad for some of these people who have been done over by labour hire companies who just don't have any respect for worker. The bosses themselves don't have a bloody conscience, and it's a disgraceful situation. And the worst, you know, the thing about this, I've got 3 federal members in Central Queensland, including Matt Canavan, who could do something about it if they went to bloody Parliament with an amendment to ensure that mining companies paid more respect to their workforce instead of treating them like dogs, because that's what they're doing.
All right, well, we might get a chance to put that to Senator Canavan a little bit later on. Jim Pearce, thank you for your time tonight.
Never, Jim.
Okay, before we do go to Senator Matt Canavan, because I'm sure he wants to respond to some of those things, he's just waiting there. But we do want to check some more results, especially because we've got a few independents threatening MPs around the state. Anthony, let's first go to Noosa.
Yes, this is the figures in Noosa. As you can see, the independents on 30, Glen Elms 26. The Greens, Labor and at least one of the other independents put Sandra Bolton high on their how to vote card. So I think Glen Elms is in a great deal of difficulty there because he's not going to get a lot of preferences. They will favour Sandra Bolton. The only thing that might be to watch out for there is when I was doing the figures, the polling place figures for Noosa, there were 10,000 taken at the pre-poll centre last time, and I'd expect it to be even bigger this time. And independents aren't always very good at staffing those things, so we'll be interested to see what happens there. But that is quite a boil over to see figures like that. So Noosa's becoming, once again, is quite a peculiarity of this election. And then we have Rockhampton, which we were aware of was an issue. There was a poll which was published the other week and had Margaret Strelo on half of that vote. Well, she's got 24%, and on those numbers she will do well on preferences from others, and she has a strong chance of winning that seat. So there's a seat that Labor would normally bank. This is a seat that Labor held in 2012, which tells you it's a safe seat. So for Labor, if they lose that to Margaret Strelo, well, at least they can talk to her, I suppose. I mean, she did run for pre-selection, but she would be far. She's not under caucus control, of course, if she wins that seat. Someone mentioned Springwood. Labor's not in any problem in Springwood. Mick de Brenny's easily been elected there. There were some very early figures which didn't look very good, but the final figures have settled down. I thought I should bring up Glasshouse because I did mention it earlier as a possible Labor gain. The figures have changed substantially. The LNP primary vote is very low. That's quite a high vote, 23% for One Nation. And we're getting a preference count between Labor and the LNP there, and it's showing that I think the two-party preferred swing there is 1.6 to the LNP, which is the wrong way for Labor. So you'd expect the LNP will retain that, and Andrew Powell will stay. He only just hung on last time, and this time he's actually with a different flow of preference. And what we're seeing really is that last time Labor did extraordinarily well with preferences. They got 2-1 from Palmer United, from Katters Australia, from One Nation, from Independents. And that was so at odds with what we normally see at federal elections. And this time we've got a more normal set of preference flows. And I just want to show Hinchinbrook, which is just so difficult to figure out. Is he going to go there for me? No, it's not, which is a bit of a shame. But in Hinchinbrook, I think Katters Australia Party have a very strong chance of picking up that because Andrew Powell is only on, let me see, Glasshouse?
Yeah, the Cripps.
Hinchinbrook, sorry, Cripps. No, I can't get Hinchinbrook up. But Stafford Cripps, he's a former treasurer in the Attlee government after the Second World War in Britain. Andrew Cripps.
Different election.
Different election. Andrew Cripps is only on about 29%, and One Nation, and Katters Australia is ahead of One Nation, is ahead of Labor, and will benefit from preferences of both.
Thanks, Anthony. Well, before we get back to the panel, we're going to show you Jackie Trad, the Deputy Premier in South Brisbane. She spoke to her supporters a short time ago.
From a statewide perspective, there's still quite a number of seats that are yet to be decided. But what's clear from the results to date is that Queenslanders overwhelmingly put a number one in front of stability and decency in this state instead of cuts and chaos. But it is the case that the results are going to be close. They are going to be close, and we won't know the outcome for a number of seats tonight. But we do know that here in South Brisbane, with more than 50% of the votes counted, that Labor will end up with about 53% of the two-candidate preferred.
Jackie Trad saying she's got 53% of the vote there. Matt Canavan, let's just go back first to Jim Pearce.
Sure.
Because he had a big go at you there. He took a big swing at you.
Sure, well...
how do you respond?
I'm happy to respond. Jim Pearce is all talk and no action. He in the last couple of years said he was going to defend farmers and oppose Labor's ridiculous laws not allowing farmers to develop their own land, taking their rights to clear trees on their land off them. He was all talk about it, he was going to do it, and it came to the vote in the Parliament, and he lined up with Stephen there, with his Greenie friends in Brisbane, and deserted the farmers of Central Queensland. So I'm not going to cop any lectures off Jim. He is right, though. I mean, I do respect him. He's a strong fighter for the region. He's just so bound by this Labor discipline, he can't break out and actually get results, unfortunately.
Do you share his views on the FIFO problem?
Absolutely. I think the FIFO issue has been a terrible blight on the mining industry. I give credit to the Queensland Parliament. It was the Labor Party, but it was also the LNP in this last term that have banned 100% FIFO. I think that's wrong and should not be allowed. There are issues that Jim also raised about labour hire. Absolutely, they've got to be worked through. But to suggest it's as simple as passing a line in an act and it's all going to be fixed is giving false hope to people. If it was that easy, I'm sure the Labor Party in the Senate would have put up the amendment, got the support of the crossbench and put pressure on us. They haven't, because there's a much more difficult issue than Jim's making out tonight.
Anthony Chisholm, he was pretty emotional.
He was. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and I know that basically we wouldn't have won the last election if he hadn't run in Morenni, because no one else would have won that seat apart from Jim. He was the only one who was a chance to win it tonight. So it is going to be tough, but he's been a fantastic servant of the Labor Party for a long period of time, and even better, he's a fantastic fella.
And let's not forget, we might have just seen the election of the first One Nation member there, because that's what Anthony's predicting.
Could be. It's too early to call that seat, I think, right now, but that's one they have in play. But I still think the point here for the night is One Nation is not going to get to half a dozen or 7 or 8, which they were speculating about at the start of this campaign. This is a disappointing result for One Nation. They may be able to jag a few seats. They certainly got their competitive in, but they would have been expecting a lot more tonight.
Can I just go back to another big issue which Anthony keeps mentioning in his summaries there, the pre-poll. Like, traditionally it hasn't been a big issue in Queensland, but are we seeing it's going to play a very big role in this election tonight?
Might be better to ask some of the state guys. I don't know about pre-poll of the state election. You're right, it hasn't really cropped up.
Oh, look, I think it's certainly, once people have realised you don't have to run the gauntlet on election day, they start turning up early. So I think for state and federal elections over a number of cycles now, we've seen that grow. And obviously, given how tight some of these seats are, they're going to be important. But
they don't get counted all tonight, do they?
Well, they do count the majority, the vast majority of them tonight. So my understanding in Townsville, for instance, is that is underway now. And obviously that'll be really important for us to get a handle on how those...
Deb was saying that in her electorate, not all of them are getting counted tonight. Stephen Miles, pre-polls, who are they favouring, the incumbents?
It does two things. It favours those that are organised and have people there handing out how to votes every day, particularly candidates who can take the time to be there and greet voters as they come in. It's one of the best uses of a candidate's time. But they also, people vote at the state of the campaign at the time that they're voting. And so if you see a shift in support, momentum go one way or the other, the pre-poll will often negate that benefit. So in a lot of these places, it's going to come down to what was happening in that campaign at that time and what each party was doing and what each candidate was doing.
Yeah, and it was a record in Queensland, you know, again, something like a third of Queenslanders who cast their votes early. Does it change the way that you have to run the campaign?
It does.
Don't save your big announcements, you know, to the end. Very
much so. I think Labor's last big policy announcement was more than a week out from election day. That's because even by then, maybe 10-15% of people have already voted. If you saved a big announcement till the Friday, you would have missed a quarter of the people.
Just another one of the results that Anthony took us through, or the figures that Anthony took us through before, Margaret Strelo in Rockhampton, the Independent. Can you work with her, because she didn't have some, you know, nice things to say about both sides of politics and how they had forgotten Rockhampton?
Well, let's wait to see what happens in Rockhampton, but what you're starting to see is that even if everything goes against Labor, even if everything goes wrong for us, the Greens pull ahead in Maiwar, Margaret wins in Rockhampton, even if all of those things happen, for the LNP to form government, they need a coalition of 2 independents, 1 Nation, 3 Katter MPs and a Green. Now, if that's not the chaos we predicted, then I don't know what is. Holding together minority government with Katters, 2 independents, 1 Nation and a Green, that's going to be pretty hard.
Jane Prentice, you had a front row seat to a hung parliament at the federal level, and the chaos that the coalition levelled at the ALP, do you think that the LNP could possibly go forward if it had to cobble together such a coalition?
Well, you've got to work with what the people give you. I think you've got to respect what the voters deliver. It was very interesting. I was speaking to a friend who's out from Denmark, and he said it's very interesting that in Australia we think you have to have a majority. He said most European parliaments are coalitions negotiated after elections, and he thinks we need to get used to it. But it's very interesting, some of the challenges we have here. We're talking before, I just want to finish up on the pre-poll, because it's interesting that what they find is that once you vote pre-poll, then that group of people do it again next time because it is more convenient. And whilst it does, I think, benefit people who are organised, the other aspect of that is the postal vote, which benefits probably the major parties who get those letters out to the constituents, who get the how to vote cards out with the application form. So I think that you're going to see a lot more emphasis on pre-polling, and as Stephen said, we need to look at sort of tapering policy issues and announcements more than a week out from the election, because if there's an issue in the last week,
it's funny. Then you've got the launch, and both had the launch the Sunday before. Yes. The poll seems a little bit late, but.
Let's go to Emma Griffiths now. She's standing by to talk to Andrew Laming, the federal MP for Bowman.
Andrew Laming, your seat of Bowman is based around southeast Brisbane, and a couple of the seats there I know you were watching with interest. They were marginal one way or the other. They haven't gone as you've expected, have they?
No, and this is classic outer metropolitan Brisbane challenge for the LNP. We would regard ourselves as probably strong in Redlands, but we've lost it tonight. We thought we had a chance in Labor Capalaba, but haven't pulled it off. So those two are still very close seats, but it does set the general challenge that Labor's picked up some seats in outer metropolitan Brisbane that may be making the difference at the moment.
And what do you put that down to?
Well, you've got the One Nation effect in outer metro. It does come in from the regions, and we've seen a 16-17% One Nation vote, preferencing against a sitting LNP MP. That's always going to be pretty tough to overcome.
Is that all?
That's the main factor. I mean, we would say that most of those might have been our votes at one time. So at the moment you're seeing One Nation and the LNP having a vote very similar to Labor and the Greens. But if you have them forcefully preferenced against a sitting MP, it's very hard to hold when the percentages are in excess of 15%.
Andrew Laming, looking at a couple of the other seats as well that seem to be in play and more Labor gain than anything that we can tell at the moment. For instance, Bonnie and Gavin. Are you putting that down as well, simply to preferences and the One Nation effect?
It's hard to judge on the Gold Coast. I'd suspect that the One Nation vote will be smaller down there. These were traditional LNP areas, and you definitely need to be holding them to have a chance at overcoming Labor. What we've seen, I think, in my neck of the woods, which is replicated in places like Springfield and Aspley as well, is that we had two major parties really fighting to gain traction on what they stood for. That means you start to give big promises, and increasingly that just feeds against the major parties because people are sceptical about promises and commitments in the last few weeks before an election. And we increasingly saw that the conversation was about the promises and not about the previous 3 years.
You're a federal MP, and over the last month or so there's been quite a bit of instability when you're looking at coverage of federal issues. There's been instability with Section 44 of the Constitution. How much do you think that has fed into Labor's claim that they can offer stability in Queensland?
Well, you'd certainly be saying Canberra wouldn't be adding anything to the LNP's fortunes, but also you'd have to understand that Canberra just looks at Queensland in general and doesn't understand it. Queensland is something that is so distant from Canberra's mind, it's very, very hard for them to intervene in a positive way on either side of politics. Queensland is its own machine. It has a huge proportion of its population in the regions. We get results and fluctuations you simply don't see anywhere else in the country. But the way it's going at the moment, if we see this gap that Labor has built up not being narrowed in the coming days, then we're looking at a continuation of mostly Labor government in this state since 1998. Virtually no other state in Australia has that record.
And how much do you put down the LNP's showing in this election to the leadership, to Tim Nicholls?
Look, on both sides, I can tell you that people weren't talking about either of these major parties having a vision for the future. There was certainly plenty of dissatisfaction which fed into a One Nation vote potentially, but Labor's job was to reduce that One Nation vote in the last week or so. And I think when we look back on this campaign, there was a complete shift in Anastasia Palaszczuk from taking on the LNP to directly taking on One Nation. She basically threw the cards up in the air and said, I'm going for broke to rule on my own or nothing. And that call may well prove to be pretty instrumental.
The one that worked. Andrew Lamming, thank you very much.
Great to be with you, Emma.
And this is what they're all playing for. 93 seats on the floor of the lower house of the Queensland Parliament. Unique in Australia because there is no upper house, so it's a winner-take-all chamber. You're watching the ABC's election night coverage. Thanks for your company. I'm Matt Wordsworth.
And I'm Jessica Van Vonderen. It's about 9:20 in Queensland. 60% of the vote has been counted. We still can't give you a winner. We're going to go through some of those figures shortly. But Anthony Green, what have you got for us?
Before I do that, I'll just talk a couple of constitutional issues here. One is there's a high probability that Labor won't get to 47 and they're going to fall short. But there's no clear alternative government. And in those circumstances, the government can't resign. David Bartlett tried that in 2010 in Tasmania, advised for Michael Hodgman to become Premier, and the governor rejected the advice because there was no point appointing somebody as Premier who's going to go to the floor of the Parliament and promptly lose. So despite what Labor said they may get, if they have the most seats, they will probably have to face government.
So you're saying the governor would think that the coalition, if it's too broad, would be too shaky to allow to form?
Well, unless the opposition can say it clearly has more seats than Labor, then it can't ask to form. You know, the Premier has to advise somebody be approached. But if the opposition, if Tim Nicholls is a leader and he doesn't have an agreement with crossbenchers, you can't advise him to become Premier. And that's what happened in Tasmania in 2010, where David Bartlett asked the governor to appoint the opposition leader as the new Premier before facing Parliament. And the governor said, no, you can't do that. There's no certainty that he can govern. So the current government has to go to may well have to go to the Parliament. It's different from last time because Anastasia Palaszczuk clearly could form government and could face Parliament. So it's different in that sense. What's the scenario to get round that? Well, in 1996, again in Tasmania, Ray Groom said he would not govern in minority as he was a majority Liberal Premier. And when he lost his majority, he resigned as Premier. And Tony Rundle became the new Liberal Premier. So if there's a problem with the promise, you can always try something like that. That may not be acceptable down here, but it has happened previously. And the third thing to say is this is a fixed-term Parliament. The mechanism to get a new election is a process that takes several weeks that involves votes of no confidence and attempts to try and cancel the vote of no confidence. So basically, unless the two sides of politics believe that it's in their best interest to go to another election, it's very difficult to get another election. You need a vote of no confidence in one government and then an inability to cancel that vote of no confidence or the ability to express confidence in another government. So that's the procedure that's been adopted with the fixed-term parliaments. So if there's no clear government out of today, then the question is whether this parliament would last 3 years and how you get out of it.
All right, should we get some latest figures?
I'll go back to my numbers. Have you? Again, let's just look at the primary vote again. We're up to 60% now. The Labor vote is drifting down slightly to 35.5 now. And the LNP vote has been drifting up slightly over the last hour. So those are the numbers we're seeing. And if we have a look at the statewide two-party preferred, it's showing a 1.2% swing, which is a little bit less than some of the polls are indicating. But I also think that two-party preferred is extremely speculative because there's so many seats that aren't two-party preferred contests. And I'll have a look at some of the seats that we're definitely now lifting as changing. Labor's gained Aspley, LNP's gained Buderim and Bundaberg. Cairns is a Labor gain. Hummerstone is a Labor gain. I haven't looked at those figures recently. I'd like to have another look at those internally. But the Labor Party gained Redlands. So there's been some Labor gains, but they're just losing or they can't pin down some of those seats in North Queensland. We looked at those Cook figures earlier. We looked at Thuringowa, Burdekin, Morani. They're just impossible to call. So those seats which Labor may lose in North Queensland may be the things that prevent them getting a majority. I think we thought beforehand Labor might win enough southeast seats to compensate for losses elsewhere, but they haven't. Doesn't look like they're winning enough in the southeast.
Thanks, Anthony. We've got political reporter Josh Bavis standing by at the Labor camp in Oxley. Josh, this is precisely not what the Premier had asked for. She has asked all along to be delivered a majority so that there is stability.
All the way through the campaign, Jess, that's what she was asking for, a majority. And so far it's not looking like that tonight. The mood here at the ALP's main party is, I'd describe it as positive but tense. It got off to a good start for the ALP faithful. We heard from Jess Pugh, who's taken up the seat. She stole the seat from the LNP Tanya Smith. That was the seat of Mount Omni. She came in about an hour and a half ago claiming victory. Then we heard from Leanne Enoch, who has retained the seat of Alcester. That really G'd up the crowd here. But as those figures started to get a bit tighter, so has the mood. And everyone is looking at those predictions, not what the Premier has asked for. Leanne Enoch was telling me that she believes that the positive result, though, for the ALP was due to Anastasia Palaszczuk and displaying some of those values and principles of hers throughout the campaign.
I imagine there's some quite puzzled faces there as well tonight, as everybody around the state is trying to work out what the heck is going on.
That's a good description of it. Look, and at the beginning it was looking like the ALP was ahead in leaps and bounds, but now it's really coming down seat by seat. So no one here is claiming overall victory by any means. We had heard that the Premier was not too far off attending this function. That's since been pushed back a little, especially with those figures beginning to tighten.
Josh Bavis, thank you. Let's go to Leonie Mellor, who is standing by at the LNP HQ. Leonie, what's the mood like there?
Well, you can probably hear, Matt, it's pretty raucous behind me, but I think a lot of the people here haven't actually caught up to date with a slight change in the last hour or so. There was certainly an air of the inevitable some time ago. A lot of people were thinking, look, you know, we can't really win from here. And certainly the people that travelled closely with Tim Nicholls throughout the campaign have been looking very morose throughout the night. So they've pretty much got on with things here tonight, but I really don't think it's quite hit home that things have changed in the last little while. We've seen some heavy hitters in Peter Dutton, the federal minister, arrive here. We've also had Larry Anthony and the Lord Mayor Graham Quirk, but so far no speeches, and we're still hearing that Tim Nicholls is some time away.
Right, okay, and so is there any chat about the perhaps explanation for One Nation's showing tonight? Has that been what's occupying their minds, or are they talking about the Green vote?
Definitely talking about the Green vote, what's happened there, and particularly here in the southeast. Just wondering, I think they're a bit perplexed about One Nation as well. A lot of head scratching going on. I think it's going to take a couple of days really just to sort out what has happened here. I was chatting to Peter Dutton because, of course, there's been a lot of talk about federal implications from this too, and asked what this means federally, and his answer was no impact federally at all. So the standard line there.
Leonie Mellor at the LNP party, thank you so much for your time. We're going to now take a look at some of the seats that are looking doubtful tonight. Anthony Green, starting in Gavin on the Gold Coast.
Yes. Let me get where I'm going. Gavin, now, Sid Cramp is now slightly ahead on first preferences, but there's still 10% with the Greens. And I think that's the difficulty in that electorate, is the Green preferences are flowing solidly towards the Labor Party. And we're saying there's a 3.7% swing, and Labor's ahead. We haven't definitely given that away to come back closer. I haven't got good pre-poll history results in that electorate, so I might have to look at the actual count. But I think on those first preferences, it would be very hard to see Sid Cramp winning on those first preferences. So that's an interesting one. Maryborough has been interesting, and Bruce Saunders has clearly had a good result here. Now, from 45%, he should hold that seat. And there'll be enough leakage of preferences, a few votes from the Greens, that our prediction is he will actually hold that seat.
Amazing result.
At this stage, and certainly I think he won it from 25 last time, so that's a 20. If I look at the change in vote in that electorate, you can see what's happened. Big shift towards the Labor Party, lost for the LNP, and 30% here was with the former independent member, Chris Foley, who stood last time, and Palmer United, I think, Canada's Australia Party. So there's a massive shift around to the first preferences there. And my estimate, I've got an estimate of preferences here, I think there's a 2.7% swing to him. But have his first preference go up so much, you would expect that, I suspect he's held on to Maryborough. But the other surprise from last time, Bundaberg has not been as good for the Labor Party. Now, Leanne Donaldson's now ahead, but the LNP's on 33, One Nation 21. And we have I'll look at the change in vote here. I should look at the change in vote, come back to that in a moment. The Labor vote's static, and there's been a shift from the LNP to One Nation. It's a complete shift in the preference flows in that electorate, because it was won last time because Palmer United preferences were so solidly towards Labor, and this time there's nothing like that. So from the same first preference vote, Labor can't win, and so we're seeing a 4.1% swing to the LNP, and the new LNP member is David Batt, who I think is the sergeant in charge of the Bundaberg PCYC. So he looks like he's an addition to the LNP caucus after this election. And I want to bring up Maiwar because I'm being asked, I've currently got it as Labor ahead. I don't think Scott Emerson can win that seat from there. It is not clear. There's only 130 votes difference between the Green and the LP. There's one other candidate. There's postals and pre-polls, etc. to come. It's not at all clear who's finishing second there. I think whoever finishes second will win that seat. I could put the Green ahead, but it might change next week. So I've left that in doubt. I can't see Scott Emerson winning. I'm just not sure whether it's Labor or the Greens who will win that. So there are some quite peculiar results like that. So I think that's definitely one on the left side of the parliament, left side of politics. But whether it's Labor or Green is difficult to tell.
Well, let's go to a student of the Maiwar electorate, Jane Prentice. When you see, such 130 votes between the Green and the Labor second place getters there, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, if the Greens maintain their position ahead of Labor, it is clearly going to be a Green win. But I think you'll find pre-poll and postal will push Labor ahead of the Greens, and I think Scott will come through on pre-poll and postal.
And Anthony Chisholm, you kind of exhaled when you saw Maryborough, 45% for Bruce Saunders. What's behind such a increase in the vote there?
It's an amazing result, and if you haven't been there and seen Bruce on the ground, like, he is a one-person phenomenon in Maryborough, and I think the work that they've done with walkers in particular and the policy that the Premier has pursued is full credit to Bruce and the team. But the other thing I wanted to make, and this is a point about One Nation, is Labor lost Maryborough in 1998 to One Nation, and we only won it back last time, and we've held on to it again. So I think from a Labor point of view, it shows that we can learn those lessons with a good candidate and good community support. We can rebuild the Labor vote in those areas. So all credit to Bruce and his team, absolutely phenomenal.
Which is fine, but if you fall short of 47, which is what Anthony Green was telling us before, that's worst case scenario, isn't it?
Well, I still think that there's enough seats in play for us to get there, so I wouldn't be pessimistic on that front at the moment, but I'd probably say it's looking less likely that we'll know the result tonight.
Yeah, Matt Canavan, obviously that's the thing. The leaders have to come out and say something tonight, so if you're Tim Nicholls, what are you saying?
Well, I'll leave that up to Tim, but as I said earlier tonight, this is a rejection of the Premier's call. The Premier went out there and said she wanted a majority. She asked the Queensland people to back her, and they have not. They have not tonight, clearly. Now, I think it'll be interesting to play a drinking game to see when the first time a Labor politician or the Premier starts talking about doing deals this week. Because they will. It's just a matter of time, whether they do tonight or on Monday morning. They said they wouldn't do deals last week, but I bet you a bottom dollar the next week they'll be talking about doing deals with the Greens, with independents and possibly even One Nation candidates as well, because that's what they always do. They'll never want to lose government. They'll do anything they can to hold on to it.
Stephen Miles, do you agree with that? There is no, it's gone past 9:30. There is no clear indication that Queenslanders in droves have gone out and listened to the call for majority government.
Well, if Matt wants to talk about what Queenslanders have rejected, they've rejected Tim Nicholls. They've rejected the LNP. This is a massive swing against the LNP, both in the southeast and in the regions. The swing against the LNP in the regions is twice the swing against Labor. I still think we can get to 47. I think we're going to have to wait and see all of these be counted. But the pathway for Tim Nicholls to make a majority here is a cobbled together coalition of Greens, One Nation, Independents. He just can't. I don't see how he can do it, and I don't know how he explains that in some kind of speech tonight.
Well, what's the message Anastasia Palaszczuk is going to have to send to the voters tonight?
I assume that Anastasia will express confidence that as counting proceeds, we'll get to the majority that we asked for. And that's entirely possible on the seats that are available at the moment. I don't think anyone should be rushing to a conclusion here. You're right. These pre-poll and postal votes could take days and weeks. My seat took, I think, 8-10 days to settle last election, and we didn't know the result until then. So yes, it's going to take a while. Yes, the leaders will be working out how they describe those situations to people tonight, but I think Anastasia can rightly stand up and say that this is a much more solid result for Labor than the LNP. It's a very poor result for the LNP, and Tim Nicholls is going to have to explain that. You've already seen two contenders, John Paul Langbroek and Deb Freckleton, refuse to rule out that they will contest the leadership. We haven't heard from Tim Mander. He's held his seat quite convincingly. So
well, I think they said it was a bit early in the night. I'm not sure that they, ruled out giving the answer.
Well, they certainly didn't rule it out.
All right, well, why don't we have a look at the leaders' seats themselves to see how they're going. Anthony Green, let's start with Inala.
No, actually, I'm going to jump in and do something else. I didn't tell you this, but Tharangawa I have to discuss because this is really interesting. The Labor's got 33.5, the LNP 19.9, One Nation 19.1, Katter's Australia Party 15.5. Now, on those numbers, you'd say Labor will get run down, except the LNP directed preferences to Labor in Tharangawa. If Katter's Australia gets One Nation ahead of the LNP, then Labor wins the seat. We've got preference counts. The preferences are flowing to Labor from the LNP. That's what the actual counts are saying. But for that to matter, it depends on how many Katter's Australia Party preferences flow to One Nation, which then gets them ahead of the LNP. What you don't know is that these two parties, the minor parties, are not always very good at getting pre-polls and postals and the like, and they certainly don't get absent votes. So that is completely in doubt. If it stays in that order and it's Labor versus LNP, I don't think Labor can win that. They'll be really struggling to win it. But if it goes the other way and One Nation gets ahead of the LNP, then Labor wins the seat. So Tharangawa, there'll be a lot more counting to come before we know what's going on there. But we're going on to look at
Inala. Let's have a look at Anastasia Palaszczuk's seat.
It's the Premier seat. It's one of the safest seats. The father held it before her. And as you can see there, she's got 68.9% of the vote. And if we look at the two-party preferred there, we're seeing a swing of 4.3% and three-quarters of the two-party preferred vote in that electorate. It's a very safe seat. Whereas Clayfield is a bit more doubtful, is usually a bit more marginal. It was won by the Labor Party during Peter Beattie's period. Tim Nicholls has got 48% of the vote, 19% nearly for the Greens. The Greens have done well in all the seats, within about 2 seats of the CBD, done well in Miller, Bulimba, Greenslopes, all those electorates. And if I look at the two-party preferred swing there, across most of northern Brisbane, there's a swing of about 5%, except for in Everton, where Tim Mander's increased his vote. Butterham, which was Steve Dixon's seat, he's come second, and Labor preferences elect Brent Mickelberg. And if we look at the two-party preferred swing that's going on there, it's 63.2% because the Labor preferences are clearly flowing to Brent Mickelberg, and he will be the new member for Butterham. And I've got a couple more seats here. Mansfield. Ian Walker, who's currently the member, but the redistribution dealt him a rough hand. He's 0.2% behind there, but there's 11% with the Greens, and we do have a preference count in that electorate. He's starting 1% behind because of the redistribution. We're seeing a 1% swing to Labor, which is notionally an increase in their majority. And the hero page is Corinne McMillan, who's she's the principal of Cavendish High School. Cavendish Street High School, yes. Cavendish Road High School. So she's the new member for Mansfield, which continues its record as a bellwether electorate. It's a regular bellwether electorate in Queensland. Aspley, Tracy Davis, a former minister. She's ahead there on first preferences, but a substantial vote for the Greens and One Nation. And we've actually got a preference count in this electorate showing a 5.4% swing. Again, her margin was damaged by the redistribution, and we're thinking that it looks like that she will be defeated in that electorate. And there's one other seat on this list of runs, which is Marnomini. It was the other seat which was affected by the redistribution. Jess Pugh lost narrowly to Tanya Smith last time. Her first preference vote is up substantially this time. The LNP vote's down, a swing towards One Nation. and we're getting a 5.9% swing, and we're predicting that Jess Pugh, she's notionally holding this already, but she now wins the seat as a second attempt, and is the new Labor member for Mount Ommaney.
Thanks, Anthony. Jane Prentice, 3 LNP names there where it's not looking good. Ian Walker, Tracy Davis in Aspley and Tanya Smith.
All a great loss to the Parliament, all great workers. It really would be, what will be a tragedy if we lose them. They're great party members, and they've contributed a lot to the Queensland Parliament during their terms of service.
You'd go back a long way with Ian Walker, wouldn't you?
Young Liberals, yes.
Maybe a medium way.
Yes, he and Heather, yeah, maybe before they even married. I remember Heather Appleton.
Yes, well, it's yeah, obviously it's another blow to the leadership prospects also. If Ian Walker goes, he was a deputy leader at one stage.
Well, I just think his contribution to the Parliament and to our party, he's always been a great contributor anyway before he was elected, and he made the decision to spend some time, to put himself up for election in a tough seat as it was then, and clearly with the redistribution and a high-profile candidate against him. Don't forget he also had Neil Symes swapped to One Nation.
Former Lytton LNP MP.
Who Ian helped get elected last time, and of course directed preferences against him.
So obviously Ian Walker's out of the scene. Tim Mander gets a swing towards him in Everton from what we've heard so far. So
I think
perhaps
he will.
A leadership prospect for the future there if Tim Nichols falls over tonight?
Oh, I think it's a few days away before we discuss those sort of things. I mean, I still think Scott Emerson will still be in there as well.
As a leadership potential?
Well, you've got a lot to choose from, but, Tim's still there, Deb's there, Tim's there, Scott's there, JP. We've still got a very strong, high-quality team.
In terms of your history with people, you also know Tim Nichols very well. You served on
council with Tim. We both got elected in the same year, back in 2000, yeah.
His campaign, did he do a good job?
I think he did a great job. He and Deb were a great team, and I thought they did it really well. I thought they were solid. He really covered the state. And you saw...
So those losses we're just talking about, they've got nothing to do with him?
No. No, I think we need to analyse the result. I think you've seen once again a rise in the other parties and on people voting for the, I think against Labor and or against the LNP and Labor, and I think it's people enjoying the sort of the challenge of hung parliaments and the tension it brings, and maybe they feel they can influence the parliament more. It's very interesting.
What about all the silly games that we've seen at the federal level? With the citizenship debacle, members falling left, right, and centre. Malcolm Turnbull's obviously under a lot of pressure. There's whisperings about his leadership. Do you think that's been a factor here?
No, not at all. This is Queensland, and this election has really been Queensland focused completely. And when you get out there, they're talking about Queensland issues. They're talking about jobs and power, which of course...
You don't think it sends a message to Canberra?
No, I think it's all about Queensland.
Because last time you said it sent a message to Tony Abbott.
Well, no, I said we needed to listen. I thought that was the lesson we needed to learn last time about listening to the people. But you listen to some of the candidates and the members, and they say they want to talk about jobs. Well, we're delivering jobs federally. They want to talk about power prices. Well, Malcolm's acted on power prices. So those sort of issues we are already addressing. I don't think there are any federal issues affecting the Queensland result this time.
Hasn't it had an effect in at least one way, in that Barnaby Joyce normally would be considered quite an asset for the LNP, but obviously he's busy fighting a by-election, Senator Matt Canavan, so we saw him maybe 1 or 2 days up here in Queensland?
Yeah, look, I think Barnaby's a fairly unique and impactful politician, but you can't, I think, overestimate the impact. I mean, if the suggestion is if Barnaby could have spent 4 or 5 days here, not 1 or 2, somehow we'd be seeing a materially different result. I think that's a little bit of a patronising to the people of Queensland. I don't think they're that easily bought. It would have been nice to have him here, but it wouldn't have fundamentally changed the outcome tonight, in my view. I agree with Jane. I mean, if you want to look at what has been impactful in any election, you look at what your other side is talking about, right? Because they're going to pick up on what your weaknesses are. And the reality is the Labor Party were not talking about federal issues during the state campaign. They were talking about what was before the Queensland people here at a state level. and as were we on the other side. So that's driven the result here. We've got our own challenges in Canberra. We certainly need to. The other big message here is there is a lot of disillusionment, particularly in regional Queensland, and they're looking for a government with leadership and answers for their problems.
All right, well, let's take a listen to what people are talking about on social media. We'll check back in with Louisa Rebgetz.
Thanks, Matt. Well, let's have a look what's happening online at the moment. We've got an interesting Facebook post by George Christensen. He says there are clearly two Queenslands. The case for a separate North Queensland state is strong after tonight, and obviously a picture of a North Queensland cut off from the southeast. The Greens are celebrating what they're saying is a pretty significant day for them. What a day, with a smiley emoji. This is a lot of tweets and a lot of Facebook posts going around about One Nation and what didn't happen, I guess, in that space so far tonight. Ha ha ha, One Nation breaks out into a fist fight. Really self-destruction tonight. Congratulations, Jess Pugh, the new Queensland Labor member for Mount Omni. A lot of these tweets are going out congratulating, particularly from the Labor camps as well, congratulating people who have been elected this evening. And Barry Cassidy, our very own Barry Cassidy, his tweet is going viral. Labor will get 3 or 4 more seats than they need for a majority. Terrible result for the LNP tonight. So that's a little bit of what's happening online tonight. Back to you on the panel.
All right, we're looking at the Gold Coast again. 11 seats in total, 2 new ones. Still a very, very unclear picture of what's happening there. We'll get you the latest results as they come to hand tonight. You're watching the ABC's election night coverage. Queensland votes. Thanks for your company. I'm Matt Wordsworth.
And I'm Jessica Van Vonderen. So it's about 10 to 10 in Queensland. 64% of the vote counted. Anthony Green, can you please try and make some sense of it for us?
It's very hard. It's very hard to make any sense of this. I'll do the chamber and show how many seats we're definitely giving away. We are giving away, we're confident of 41, 37 and 2. And when we push seats which are leaning one way or the other, it's 45, 38. But that includes, I was just talking about that Thuringowa situation, which we've got leaning that way. But if the candidates in second and third place swap, then it may not be leaning that way. So it's very difficult to constantly deal with these changing numbers, I must say. So it's certainly, in terms of being able to try and pick a winner, it's one of the hardest ones I've ever worked on. But let's once again just have that overall vote. Again, the Labor vote continues to drift down slightly. It's now down to 35.3. One Nation 13.4. The Greens on 10. If we look at the vote in southeast Queensland, 38, 34, 9.7, 12.1 for the Greens. The Greens have done very well in inner Brisbane, which is clearly what they targeted, and that's something that must be acknowledged. But they haven't done well outside of the southeast, because have a look at regional Queensland, the Greens have only got 5.8%. So they haven't done nearly as well outside. But look at those first preferences. When nobody is above 32% first preferences in regional Queensland, that's why tonight's very wacky. It's why very difficult to follow. Is that it depends from seat to seat who gets knocked out first in the preference distribution that determines the outcome. There's a range of LNP members in places like Gympie and Gregory and Callide who are re-elected because of Labor's preferences. There is potentially a Labor member for Thuringowa elected on LNP preferences, and there's a range of One Nation members and LNP members elected on each other's party's preferences ahead of Labor. So it's one of the more complex outcomes, and there will be several days of counting to firm up what's going on here. Because as I said, with so many pre-poll votes nowadays, and they're not all going to get counted tonight because they're just such big bundles, and they have to stop counting eventually because these poor people have been working on a fixed income since 8 o'clock this morning. And they have to let them go home occasionally, even if the state is in peril. But they will certainly come back tomorrow and do some further counting. But look, we're not getting any firmer picture of whether either side can get to 47 seats. But Labor has more seats than the LNP. That's the only thing we're certain of.
All right, well, one of the other things we're seemingly certain of, Matt Canavan and Anthony Chisholm, is that the disillusionment with the major parties. You only got 60% of voters for the two big parties. You know, is that something you guys are feeling, and what will you do about it?
I'm not surprised by these results in regional Queensland. There is a lot of anxiety. There is a level of frustration that things aren't happening. It's been unfortunate that we as federal and state governments haven't been able to work together to deliver a number of projects in regional Queensland. I guess I'm not going to use tonight as a platform to blame people about that, but it hasn't happened. You know, there's a number of things that we've been trying to get going.
But do you think the message is getting through to George Street, to Canberra, that people in regional Australia obviously are voting that way for a reason and they're not being heard?
Well, it hasn't gotten through yet, Matt. I think what has been one of the unfortunate aspects of this campaign is Labor's blatant attempt to play South East Queensland off regional Queensland. I mean, I think we work best when we are one state, and we should unify, not just at state of origin, but at times of important economic policy decisions. But the Labor Party made a clear and blatant preference at this election campaign to sandbag seats in South East Queensland by adopting policies which were against the interests of regional Queensland, particularly the Adani Carmichael mine, but also goes to vegetation management policies as well. Now that threatens the unity of our state, and I'm worried about that, because that you get this sort of backlash against a government in regional Queensland you've seen today when they don't think they're being listened to.
Anthony Chisholm, what does Labor do about it, the disillusionment?
Yeah, look, I think I had a look earlier in the week because I thought it would be a combined low primary vote for the major parties. In 1998, the combined party vote was 70.12%. And then I had to go back to 1907 when it was 66.95. So that's the sort of territory that we're in. And I think it is a good lesson for any politician to heed it. And obviously we did at the federal election where there was a similar thing happen, but we obviously need to do more. I would point to a couple of bright spots, and that is, for instance, the result in Maryborough. That does give us hope. And I think the work that the state government did, and Anastasia and her team, was fantastic, and that I think shows you that you can actually change people's opinion about the difference.
Well, I guess there was an announcement about rail jobs in Maryborough refurbishing trains. So, you know, are you bringing enough jobs to the regions? Because we keep hearing tonight you guys talking about unemployment in the regions, but obviously not enough is being done there.
Well, the short answer is there'll never be enough jobs in the regions. But I think one of the concerns is that for the first time in a long time, we're actually seeing people of working age leave a town like Mackay, which has traditionally been a strong economy that has attracted people to it. People are seeing that there's opportunities elsewhere. And that's a concern for me, because if you want a government for the whole of Queensland, or you want to represent the whole of Queensland, you need to ensure that people in those regional towns understand that they've got a bright future and what that is. So I see that as an opportunity for the Labor Party, and one that we need to get right before the next federal election comes around.
But I mean, I think that's a bit of a defeatist attitude, unfortunately, from Anthony, that somehow there'll never be enough jobs in the regions. I mean, it's a bit trite. You could say that everywhere, but clearly there's more that needs to be done in the regions. So I don't understand why the Queensland Labor government won't join with us to build the Rookwood Weir, for example, in central Queensland, which we put $130 million on the table for. It's not particularly controversial. It's a weir, not a massive dam. Create 2,000 jobs according to their own modelling, but they've dithered and delayed on it. And the only justification I can see for it is because they've got to do a deal with the Greens down here, and the Greens don't like building water infrastructure in the Great Barrier Reef. That's the sort of frustration that builds, where you see the Labor Party look like they'll lose the seat of Rockhampton for the first time in history. But you've also got then the other issues with mining, as we've gone through tonight, where people in regional Queensland, they're just like, why are you guys not listening to us? Right? We want these projects, we want these jobs. And then you go back down to Brisbane and do deals with other minor parties which sell us out and sacrifice us. It's all very nice for us to have bunting and booth wrap here about Adani in Brisbane. That's lovely. You're looking at, you're taking care of an interest in something that's happening in our backyard, but then you don't listen to us when we clearly want the project.
If Rookwood Weir was so important, how come you came third and fourth in the seats that it was impacted on?
Yeah, well, that's because it's a rejection of your government.
If it's so possible,
it's a rejection of your inaction. We did win the seat federally.
If these things you're talking about are so positive in Townsville, why did you vote tank in Townsville? I mean, we're increasingly confident we're going to hold the 3 Townsville seats that are in play.
On LNP preferences.
This is yes,
the ones that you didn't want to take earlier tonight, Steve.
But not very many of them.
LNP preferences, but you're going to, if you do hold them, you'll hold them on LNP.
Your vote is in the 20s.
Well, again, it's a rejection of this government. I mean, your vote has fallen as well, because there is a frustration here. I think when governments do poorly, protest votes increase. That's what happens. And One Nation has had a very good result tonight.
Jane Prentice, just more on the disillusionment that there seems to be bipartisan agreement about, that it exists. What do you say when you head back down to Canberra and you have a meeting with Malcolm Turnbull? What do you say to him? What are we going to do about this disillusionment in Queensland with the major parties?
What do we need to do to capture the imagination of those people who have turned away from both major parties? Yep, and we need to...
Is there an answer? Have you got an answer for that?
Well, if I had an answer, I would have fed it into the state campaign. It is a challenge. I think it's a challenge for both major parties. People clearly don't see, our policies as what they want. I don't know if they want more imagination. I don't know if what they're looking for, but clearly I think the result here is they've basically rejected both major parties and preferenced or voted for the more minor parties.
You must be worried about what happens in the next federal election.
Well, the Green vote is amazing, yeah. I mean,
in Brisbane specifically?
Yeah, specifically, yes. That would have a major impact on quite a few seats.
So the Green vote in Brisbane and then some other vote outside of Brisbane?
Yeah. Well, I think it's clearly the vote in the Queensland election says that the voters out there and don't think the major parties are giving them the policies that they want. Now, you get out there and talk to people and they say they want jobs. Now, we're delivering jobs as a federal government. They say they want us to tackle power prices. Malcolm Turnbull has been tackling power prices, even though it was a state government problem. They want us to tackle infrastructure. The federal government's doing that, creating jobs. So, what do we need to do to say to them, look, we're delivering for you? Do we need to be more imaginative? Are we not selling the message? It's interesting.
Is the electorate right?
Well,
to be disillusioned?
I don't think so. I think they've turned off politics, though. I think that's half the battle, is that they're a bit fed up with the distractions, with the politics. I think it was Wayne Goss who said the best story on the front page is sport, and that'll be the day that people will be more interested in good government. But look, it's a big challenge, I think, for all governments, is convincing the voters that we have the right policies and that we can deliver them. I think they're the two things we need to do. I believe we're doing that federally, but we need to stop with some of the distractions we have as well. And Matt?
Yeah, well, I was just going to add there, if that's okay with you, Chair.
I gave you the call.
Or Mr. President, as we say in the Senate.
We're not in the Senate. We're all good.
I was just going to add, look, I think if we go back, right, if this is clearly, it's another wake-up call we've got to recognise. But if we go back to Canberra and say, okay, the answer, the solution here now is we start talking about ourselves and talk about, who's the leader in different positions, or who's a minister and who's that, they will turn off more, because that's exactly not what they want to hear. What we've got to do is turn around. Absolutely.
The next federal election, the next federal election, what kind of, because Queensland's very important to the outcome.
Absolutely.
What kind of threat are you facing? What kind of losses are you worried about?
Oh, look, I mean, all of the coastal Queensland federal seats can swing, and the Labor Party, I believe, has held every seat from the tip of Cape York to Hinkler to Bundaberg at some point over the last 10 years. So those electorates are ones that do often are bellwethers in a certain degree. But I'm not interested so much in what our time is, what our outcome is. What we've got to do is work out how you get there, how you get that result. How you get that result, it's not rocket science, but you listen to people, you spend time with them, you work out what they want, and then you fight for it and you deliver it. And that's what we're trying to do. It's hard at the moment, but we just got to redouble those efforts.
Let's take a look at some more seats, and we'll head firstly north to the Whitsundays. This was the LNP's most marginal seat, the sitting LNP member Jason Costigan since 2012.
This was one that was talked about as a possible Labor gain, but it's not worked out that way. We got half the vote counted Jason Costigan is ahead with 32.6 from Taha 31, 20% there with One Nation, another 8 with Qatar's Australia Party. So again, 2 very low first preference votes. We're getting a preference count between Labor and the LNP. Look at the change in vote first, and you can see both major parties down. The LNP down particularly, but they are getting a fair number of those preferences back. The Labor loss of first preferences damaged Labor's hopes of winning with Sunday here. It's turning into a 1.5% swing to the LNP, which means that Jason Costigan would go on to hold that seat. And there's nothing in these figures which indicates it would be other than that. Although I would point out there's a massive pre-poll centre at Cannon Vale, which you know, there's quite a number of changes with the pre-polls in that part of the electorate. Whether it affects something later, we'll have to wait and see. But at the moment, Jason Costigan's on track to hold that seat.
Let's go to Jordan now in that growth corridor around the Ipswich-Springfield area. This is a new seat, Anthony.
This is the new seat. Notional Labor, Charis Mullen is the Labor candidate. Charisse Mullen, sorry. It's a long night. It's hard enough dealing with the numbers without the pronunciation sometimes. But you can see the opponent, Labor's only got 40%, but the vote is spread all around the other candidates, and no one will emerge from that to challenge Labor's position. Compared to the last election, there's a big drop in the Labor vote, big increase in One Nation, others, big drop in the LNP vote, of course, as well. That will translate into a swing against Labor of about 3.6%, but Charisse Mullen will still win the seat. She'll be the new Labor member for the new seat of Jordan.
McConnell now, which was formerly known as Brisbane Central, where the ALP's Grace has been the member for quite a few years now under different scenarios.
She was elected at a by-election, lost in 2012, won back. As you can see, she's in second place there, and as last time, and will win on the preferences from the Greens. If we look at the change in vote that's occurred in this electorate, you can see there's a bit of a drop in, again, let's have a look here. Small drop in the Labor vote, drop in the LNP vote, a rise in the Green vote. That switch from the LNP to Green was also important in Maiwar, where there was no change in the Labor vote. It was a switch from LNP to Green. 6.6% swing after preferences, and Grace, the Minister for Employment and Industrial Relations, is back in the Parliament as the member for the new seat of McConnell, having previously it was called Brisbane Central.
Stephen Miles, listen up. We're going to Marumba now. This is your seat.
Once we just got this, let's see the graphics move on a little bit first. There we go. Grace is declared the winner. Had a little spasm there and decided he wanted to do something else while I wasn't looking. Let's go on to Marumba. Stephen Miles, his seat, moving north of Brisbane from Mount Cootha. And if we look here on first preferences, Stephen's on percentages 47.1. Reg Gully, the former member for Marumba, on 24.6. 19% for One Nation, 9% for Jason Kennedy from the Greens. We look at the change in vote that's occurred there. I think the Labor vote's down and the LNP vote's down. So again, particularly in Brisbane, the swing from the LNP to One Nation is more pronounced, less from Labor. We're seeing a 3.4% swing there, and Stephen Miles is the new member for Marumba. The current member has, of course, moved next door to Bancroft, Chris Whiting. Stephen Miles, the new member for Marumba.
And let's go back to Rockhampton in central Queensland to have another look at the seats there. Oh, sorry, Anthony, have you got that one?
Sorry? Yes, I haven't, if I can see the graphic from Marumba, because I haven't actually looked at it for a while, for Rockhampton. I'm not sure, is it coming to me on a full frame? There you go. Communications gets difficult sometimes. Barry O'Rourke was pre-selected by Labor ahead of Margaret Strelo after Bill Byrne had to retire through ill health. So if we look at the first preference votes in this electorate, you'll see that the problem for Labor is their first preference vote is rather hemorrhaged. They're down to only 30-something percent, 32%. Margaret Strelo on 24. Then we've got Wade Rothery from One Nation. Douglas Rogers, fourth for the LNP. All those preferences are flowing towards Margaret Strelo, and on those numbers, we believe that she will go on to win that seat. We've got to look at the change in vote here. You can see Labor's vote is well down. So that pre-selection battle really has hurt them. The LNP vote is also down. Let's look. I think we have a swing figure here. We do, yes. It sort of translates into something like that. And the independent wins the seat. That's Margaret Strelo, who on these numbers, 79% counted. I think it's almost certain that she'll be the new member for Rockhampton. That's an estimate by me. I haven't actually got an actual count, but I don't see that the preference flows are going to flow anything other than that.
Well, let's go back to Margaret Strelo. We spoke to her a couple of hours ago when we were thinking Barry O'Rourke was going to win, but Margaret Strelo, things have certainly changed. How do you feel?
Oh, look, it's certainly not a done deal. The preferences, the few scrutineers that I have tell me that preferences are just everywhere. I ran with a how to vote that did not show preferences, so I just said vote one and then fill every square. What I think that did was it really made people aware that they are in charge of where they put their number 2, number 3 and so forth. And so they've really lived that out. And the preferences are not following any rhyme or reason. And, so I'm certainly not calling it myself yet.
And do you think the voters saw you as another Labor option or as a true independent?
Oh, look, I think the true independent. The Labor vote here was impacted by the Adani decision the Premier made. That was certainly the motivation that I had to throw my hat into the ring as an independent. And there are a few other things that have played out over the campaign. And I think that people felt that, certainly as Mayor, I'd believed that we were being taken for granted. And some of the commitments that weren't being made, the way in which the Labor candidate hedged his bets on things that are really critical to this community, just made people feel as though, perhaps it was time to, at the very least, make this seat marginal.
Well, the panel here has been doing a bit of soul-searching because, on behalf of the major parties about a disillusionment in regional Queensland. Is that something that you've picked up on and harnessed and obviously to your own benefit here as the new member for Rockhampton?
Well, look at the One Nation vote here in Rockhampton. It's quite extraordinary that between One Nation and myself, our primary votes are, greater than the Labor vote, for instance, and a long way greater than that. And I think that speaks to a lot of frustration, mostly aimed at the Labor Party here, but they're representative of what the majors have done. We had that Flickham campaign here as well, which, as I understand it, should have benefited One Nation, but I may have got some benefit from that too.
OK, well, we're not looking like we're going to get a majority government tonight at least, and perhaps it might be a hung parliament. So who would you be supporting there, and do you feel that power in your hands already?
Look, it was one of the messages I was sending to my community. I said, look, I think this is going to be a dog's breakfast of a parliament, and if ever there was an opportunity for us to come in and to make our voice heard. Of course, we saw Liz Cunningham and what she was able to achieve for Gladstone. So I think Rockhampton saw this as a moment to do something. That said, we're available for either side, depending on how things flow out. There are some things that my community is really looking for, and we need to be treated seriously in all of this. So it's all about what is. How
well, here's your chance. What demands?
Treated,
give me a couple of demands that you would seek from anyone courting your
we want
vote.
Rookwood Weir built. We want Rookwood Weir built, so we know the business case says it should be. Gracemere needs a high school, and Calliope's getting a high school and they have less numbers. So, some of these basic things that we feel have just been left, Rookwood Weir will guarantee our security of water, and that's important, So some of these projects, I did a Santa wish list towards the end that identified everything that any candidate had talked about, everything the community had raised during this election. We could do all of that for 10% of the Cross River Rail. Now, when you put it that way, it's hard not to feel as though regions are being ignored.
All right, Margaret Strelo, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Queensland Votes, to the ABC's election centre at Southbank in Brisbane, and we have had a small crowd gathering outside there throughout the evening, enthralled perhaps by what is going on in Queensland this evening. You're also listening to us on ABC Radio around the state and around the country on ABC News Channel. I'm Jessica Van Vonderen.
And I'm Matt Wordsworth. Thanks for your company. OK, let's get a state of play. 67% of the vote has been counted. We're going up to 11 minutes past 10. We'll get the latest figures and check in with Anthony Green.
Yeah, and 67% means that Come on. Hello. Here he goes. 35.3. Those figures have been basically unchanged for a while. Labor's dipped towards 35. The LNP's been drifting up towards 34. So those two statewide votes have been sort of honing in on each other. It'll be interesting to see if we're getting pre-poll votes because they did heavily favour the LNP last time. So maybe that's what's the balancing out that's going on at the moment. And if we look at the change in vote that's occurring, again, 2.2 down for Labor, 7.6 for the LNP. One Nation up 12.6. Now, I think I'll look at the chamber again. We're getting a few seats which are starting to firm up, or we're starting to push back towards deciding again. There were some seats we just had to shift into the in doubt category and leave them there. Some of them are looking a little bit stronger now than they were earlier, and we'll come back to them in a moment. And if I look at the seats which are likely, I'm getting Labor up to 45, and that seems to be where I'm getting them at the moment. Now, what I'll do is I'll go and have a look at the all the seats that we've got left in doubt at this stage. And this is just the first preferences. Now, earlier on we said Cook looked terrible for Labor. Their vote has gone up to 39%. That is looking stronger for Cynthia Louis. We had a couple of Torres Strait Island booths come in, and clearly her vote was stronger there. So that looks stronger for Labor. I think they might win it from there. 39% might be strong enough. You wouldn't expect there to be really strong flows of preferences in an electorate like that. It's a very strange electorate. Very diverse. Diverse is the best way of saying it. Gavin, I still think that that's probably going to go Labor, but it's just staying in doubt at the moment. Actually, I noticed the gap on first preferences has widened. Again, this was one of the electorates where I didn't have a decent early vote to sort of estimate against from last time. And so a figure has come in and it looks strong for the LNP. I think that's definitely closer than it was earlier, but it's still tipped Labor at the moment. But there's more counting to come, of course. McAllister. Now, this was where Hetty Johnson was in third. That gap's now at 2.2. There's a low first preference. It's the thing that makes it difficult. I'd expect that a fair number of Green voters will give preferences directly to Labor anyway, which will probably cut off that option for Hetty Johnson getting into second place. So that's probably, again, leaning towards Labor. You're just always cautious with some of these seats. In Gavin, we just didn't... Sorry, I went backwards. My fault. Maryborough, Bruce Saunders, I'm pretty sure, has won that. He's got, well, I think he's got 47%. He won't be run down there. That's one of the ones I'll go and lift I've actually stuck it in the doubtful category. I think I'll go and give that one away because that's firmed up as the count has gone on. Mundingborough, we're getting a preference count and Labor wins it, but I'm a little concerned about these. This gap has widened between second and third now. So, and there's a lot of leakage of preferences. We're getting, I think, a Labor LNP preference count in that electorate, and it's showing Labor winning. So I think that one's also firming up for Labor. It's looking stronger now, and as I thought might happen, the third-party vote has started to slip away. I think Pumistone's firming up for Labor. They've just got a slightly low first preference figure here at 36. And again, there's an area which is rapidly growing, and they've got this area in northern Caboolture, which has basically had a lot of houses put on it since the last election, and there's a new polling place there at a high school which didn't exist 3 years ago, and it's been a bit hard to sort of estimate what's going on there. But that's looking, I think that's leaning towards Labor, and they're certainly ahead on the preference count at the moment. Maiwar, Scott Emerson is definitely defeated. We're leaving it in doubt because we're not sure whether the Greens or Labor will win that contest because it depends who finishes second. And at this stage, I think the gap was 143 votes earlier. So we're leaving that in doubt, but it's definitely an LNP loss. Burdekin.
Yep.
Well, the Murrumbidgee booth is in, but there are 3 pre-polls in mining towns which haven't reported, and that might boost the Labor vote. And if Labor gets into second spot, it might... look, I think Dellast will still win that. It's only an artifice of the preferences from last time and the redistribution that gave it as a notional Labor seat. So that becomes Dale Last is re-elected, but it becomes a notional LNP gain. Hinchinbrook, well, look, 30.7. It's looking slightly better for Andrew Cripps, but we were getting my estimate of preferences will give that to Nicholas D'Amato from Canada's Australia Party because he gets preferences from both Labor and One Nation, and he can run down a very low LNP first preference vote. But again, it may depend on what sort of pre-polls you get. Morani, I can't see how Jim Pearce wins from here. His first preference vote is too low. You carry that as preferences, favour One Nation. I don't think we're getting... I think we're getting a Labor LNP preference count earlier, but that does not look at all good for Jim Pearce. It's not an electorate where his vote increases in the post-election counting. Tharangawa, what's the gap here now? Still, if One Nation gets into second place, Aaron Harper wins easily. If One Nation finishes third, it's a much closer count. So that's in doubt because we're not sure of the order of the candidates, and the preference flows between of LNP and One Nation go in opposite directions, which completely changes the result. Noosa, I think it's highly likely that this Sandra Bolton is going to win that seat. Glenn Elms will really, with everybody preferencing against him, he's not going to win from 29.5. So it looks like we might have another independent in the parliament from Noosa. And Rockhampton, another independent, I think it's highly likely that Margaret Strelo will win that seat. She will not do well with the absence. She will probably not do well with the postals. So that may yet be close. But at this stage, I'd say on my estimates of preferences, she should be able to pass Labor because they've only got 31.8 there, and both One Nation and the LNP directed preferences to them. So that's all the seats we've got in doubt, and most of those are in doubt for just simply because we're not sure the order candidates are finishing. But Labor's position has improved recently in a number of those seats, and I've got them on 41 definites, leaning towards 45, and they've got slightly stronger in the last half hour or so.
Thanks, Anthony. Well, we do have a complex situation unfolding here in Queensland tonight, and we do appreciate the insights of the panel who are here with us. National Senator Matt Canavan, Labor Senator Anthony Chisholm, Liberal MP Jane Prentice, and the Environment Minister Stephen Miles. Thanks for sticking with us.
It's all right.
I just want to go and we're just standing by just before we go back to our panel for the Premier to enter the ALP HQ and say a few words. Obviously, we're very interested to see how she describes tonight's events, the vote that she said that she didn't want to become more chaos and confusion. We're also wanting to hear from the LNP leader, Tim Nichols, tonight, and while we wait for them to get to the stage, maybe I'll just go to Anthony Chisholm quickly because it's not just Katter's Australian Party. It's not just One Nation Party. It's also the Greens. Anthony Green saying within two suburbs of the CBD, the Greens are polling very strongly. We saw this in Victoria in the Northcote by-election, and we're seeing this phenomenon of the teal Greens, the small L Liberal Greens. Is that something that we're seeing here in Brisbane?
Yeah, look, their vote has been growing. Obviously, they won the council ward at the last council election. But it is really disappointing that they spend so much effort targeting the Deputy Premier in Jackie Trad when, look at the result in Maiwar, which was not a focus from the Greens. Yet if they'd actually put some money in there, they could have easily defeated Scott Emerson. So I think it just shows you that their twisted logic of prepared to spend so much targeting Jackie Trad when they could have spent targeting an potential LNP treasurer.
But is there a future? Is there a future in central Brisbane where you're going to start losing to the Greens?
Oh, look, it's certainly a tough battle and one that I'm very conscious of. The one thing I like is that similar in Sydney where you've got Anthony Albanese and Tanya Plibersek, so really strong personalities who represent bigger than the Labor brand. I think we've got the same here in Queensland where you've got Jackie Trad and Grace and Steve if he'd stayed there. But it is important when you've got a minister that you do your best to look after him and someone who can make a senior contribution, which is obviously what happened with Steve moving to the seat that he did.
And you'll just see in the bottom corner of the screen, you've got John Badhams, a former union boss, just making some introductory remarks there. So we're waiting for Anastasia Palaszczuk, the Premier, to come to the podium and give us some thoughts on what's happened in Queensland Votes 2017. Stephen Miles, what do you think she's going to say?
Well, I think after that report of the in-doubt seats from Anthony, we can be more confident that Labor has a good chance of getting to a majority. Anthony has us with 45 seats right now, and then if you look through, so we only need 2 more. If you look through those in-doubt seats, Cook, Gavin, McAllister, Maryborough, Mundingburra, Pumicestone, Maiwar, Thurrangower, we're ahead in all of them. So if we win 2 of those seats and hold all of the seats Anthony currently has us holding, then that's the 47 we need.
Is the Premier going to be sounding so positive, do you think, when she comes out on the stage tonight?
Well, I think she will obviously say that we need to see the final counts in these seats before we can determine what the parliament looks like. But I think based on that report from Anthony, there are plenty of seats where we are ahead and firming on top of the 45 that are already likely to fall to us. So I think we've focused tonight on how difficult it might be to get to 47, but based on those numbers, I think we have a really good shot.
If you don't, I mean, we just heard Margaret Strelo say, look, she's willing to chat. As a former ALP person, She wanted pre-selection for the ALP. Does she count as someone you can do a deal with?
I don't think we need to. I think on the current ABC numbers, we have 45 seats. We're ahead in another, 8 or 9. We only need to win 2 of them.
Oh, Anthony's not giving them away yet, so the ABC's
I'm not calling it,
until
but I'm
Anthony
saying there is
calls
I'm saying a definite 42.
Yeah.
It's leaking towards 45. There's only 42. I'm definitely saying, because there's another bunch there which I think Labor can win, but really, you might claim them, but I'm not sure the ABC is going to sort of say yes, they've got.
Well, for example, on that list, Anthony, you had Maryborough, which you've said is very hard for Bruce to lose.
I've just given that one away. I think Palmerston would make it 43. Cook makes it 44. Oh, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you here, gentlemen, but we are expecting the Premier.
Labor
Let's take a listen.
member, Milton Dick. Here she is, the Premier of Queensland, Anastasia Palaszczuk. Three cheers for Anastasia. Hip, 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 hip.
Reception for Anastasia Palaszczuk there from the Labor camp, despite the fact that neither major party tonight has hit the magic 47 numbers of seats. Let's hear what she has to say.
Well, good evening, everyone. To my fellow Queenslanders, I said winning the 2015 election was like climbing Mount Everest. This election has been like climbing Mount Everest all over again. Tonight, we are close to the peak, but we are not quite there, and we will not get there tonight. But I remain confident we will be able to form a majority Labor government once all the votes are counted. I am overwhelmed by the support for Labor, and I will continue to be a Premier for all of Queensland. Based on tonight's results, our Labor members of Parliament will represent Queenslanders from the Torres Strait to the Gold Coast in the next Parliament. And Queenslanders are not red or blue, we are maroon. And Queenslanders always win when we work together. I will always put Queenslanders first. One thing remains clear. I will never sell out the needs of Queenslanders by doing a deal with One Nation. And it is clear the majority of Queenslanders agree with me. So tonight I want to thank the thousands of Queensland ALP members and supporters for their hard work today. I want to thank the ALP Campaign Director, Evan Moorhead, and Party President, John Badhams. I want to thank all of my ministers, my MPs, and candidates for their hard work. I want to thank the affiliate unions and the QCU for standing up for working people in this state. And I also want to acknowledge those long-term Liberal voters who for the first time ever today voted Labor. Thank you. I want to thank my family, my mum and dad, and my sisters and my nieces that are here tonight. And finally, I await the final days of counting with confidence and belief that a stable majority Labor government will be returned to work for all Queenslanders. Thank you, everyone.
Here's Anastasia Palaszczuk having won from the LNP in a massive shock result at the last election. Now, 3 years later, having led a minority government for 3 years, she still can't claim. Yet, on the figures, it's going to take a few days to see whether, in fact, she can get the majority she had asked for. Anthony Chisholm, do you share Anastasia Palaszczuk's confidence?
I do, yeah. I think that there's enough seats in play for the Labor Party to win enough of them to get to the 47 that we need. I wouldn't like to have to pick which ones they were, but I think that there'll be enough there to get. And I think the North Queensland seats around Townsville and Cairns regions are looking better than what they were probably 30, 45 minutes ago, and that's probably the key from our point of view.
Matt Canavan,
well, it's,
you willing to give it away?
Well, look, it's clear. No, certainly not. It's clear the Premier hasn't either. It's clear that the Premier has not claimed victory tonight, so the Labor Party cannot say they have won this election. Now, this might go into the fifth day of the test, so to speak, but at the moment it's looking like a draw. And a draw in a test match is not a victory, and that's quite a failure for the Labor Party after having a smashing success 3 years ago to not be re-elected this late in the night. I also noticed, as someone from regional Queensland, noticed with a bit of trepidation that the Premier did not rule out a deal with the Greens, and the nightmare that people in regional Queensland are facing tonight is a Labor Green government, and we don't know what deals the Labor Party have already done or will do with the Greens to sacrifice more jobs in regional Queensland to cling on to power.
Well, Stephen Miles, it is interesting if you look at the words that Anastasia Palaszczuk just said, that she did say, "I will never sell out Queenslanders by doing a deal with One Nation." There's no mention of a deal with anybody else there. Why?
Oh, well, that was always our commitment, but the Greens haven't won any seats here. So you're not going to do a deal with a party that doesn't have any seats.
Are you going to do a deal or not? Just tell us.
Might want to say we haven't won, but the LNP have surely lost. This is a race in a parliament with more seats, and they've come out with less.
If we'd lost,
it's a terrible result.
Said that.
Labor has, as we say, plenty of seats where we could get to 47. The Premier has expressed some confidence that as we count them, we'll get there. But there's no question about doing a deal with the Greens because the Greens haven't won any seats.
We're not far off from hearing from the LNP, Tim Nicholls, very shortly, as we understand it. Jane Prentice, do you think he will be expressing as much confidence as we just heard the Anastasia Palaszczuk express?
I think Tim will be saying that we won't know for a few days, which I think is the honest answer. I think there's quite a few seats, depending on whether the Greens or Labor get ahead, that'll make a difference. I think with 30% pre-poll and postal, that can make a difference. Some of these seats, as Anthony said, are very close.
I'll be interested to see the words that Tim Nicholls uses because Anastasia Palaszczuk said a couple of times there she's confident of majority Labor government. Do you think Tim Nicholls will be able to say the same thing?
Well, not in LNP right. I mean, I think quite clearly would need to be probably a coalition of some sort.
Which was that a great fear at the start of this campaign that he would have to enter into a coalition?
Well, no, because you go into...
That was a scare campaign.
I know it's a scare campaign, but you go into an election...
It looks like it could come to pass.
Well, you go into an election determined to win in your own right, and both parties would always do that. But clearly the voters have said, we don't accept the major parties. And look, it's a phenomenon not just in Australia. If you look around the world, the voters are pushing back on the major parties and promoting smaller parties and some of the more alternate parties. So it's a challenge for us going forward, but equally in this election we both went into it determined to win in our own right. I mean, Labor clearly went in partnership with the Greens, interchangeable in Maywa. They literally changed shirts depending on who was on the polling booth at the time. So it's interesting. The other small part, other One Nation's done well in some areas, clearly, not as well as they would have liked. I mean, I know we may not have won Maryborough, but our candidate there was only in for a short time. I mean, every seat, it's not sort of an even flow. It's peculiarities of different seats, I think, in many cases as well.
Can I say too here that I know Tim Nicholls copped a lot of criticism over the discussion on whether or not to form a coalition. But he was actually honest with people. He said, look, well, we'll respect the vote of the parliament, right? If the parliament comes back with certain numbers, we'll have to look at what discussions we have to have for the stability and long-term interests of Queensland. It was the Premier that was clearly all the time trying to pull a wool over her eyes, saying she wouldn't do deals. Now, clearly they will, to try and scrape to power. And it was the Premier saying she would just ignore, and she said again, she's doubled down tonight, saying that the 300,000 people who have voted for One Nation don't deserve respect, don't deserve to be listened to. And if we want to respond respectfully and properly to the One Nation vote we've seen tonight, the first thing we've got to do is listen to them and try and understand them. But the Premier, is, in a contemptuous way, has just said, you 300,000 people, you're the deplorables. We're not going to listen to you. We're not going to respect you. And if you do get anyone elected, I'd point out, Stephen, there's no One Nation party elected yet either. But if they do get a member elected, apparently Labor Party won't even talk to someone who was duly elected to the Queensland Parliament.
This is just nonsense. And Tim Nicholls was honest, because he was going to do a deal, or he still will try and do a deal with One Nation.
So, yeah,
but what he wasn't was principled. And that's what Anastasia was. And this is the key point here. Labor have made a principled decision around One Nation, and we've stuck to it for 20 years. Whereas One Nation are a threat, the LNP don't know how to deal with it. They haven't been able to deal with it successfully for 20 years. We take them on and we want to defeat them. The LNP kowtow to them. And that's what we've seen here, and it's not a good outcome for Queensland. So on the right side of politics, they've got a big problem with One Nation, they've got a big problem with Corey Bernardi, and they don't know how to deal with it. They couldn't deal with it in Queensland, and they can't deal with it federally. And that is what they are not owning up to.
If there is a hung parliament and the Katter are Australian Party MPs, because we know there's going to be a couple at least, are they more likely to fall this time with the ALP or with the LNP?
I'm still confident that we'll get to the 47. But what I do know about Robbie and Shane is that the Premier, when we had 7 MPs, the Premier treated them with respect, whereas the LNP treated them like dirt. And that's what you get with the Premier. She treats everyone, no matter where they are, no matter where they're from, with respect. But I'm still confident that Labor will get to the 47.
Matt Canavan, there was some lingering resentment over Shane turning away from the LNP and running as a KLP member.
Well, as there always is, and of course the Labor Party never treat rats terribly, do they, from the Labor Party? They always get along swimmingly afterwards. I mean, that was always going to happen. Shane did leave the LNP, so it was a difficult process to go through. But I've got a great respect for Shane, I've got a good relationship with him. Congratulate him on his re-election. I mean, the difficulty for the Labor Party here is on some of these scenarios we're seeing, where they're going to be trying to form a rainbow coalition of Greens, Labor and some rural.
Just nonsense.
Well, remember what happens.
They haven't won a seat yet.
Well, yeah, you guys haven't won enough seats either, so that is certainly a possibility tonight.
It's just not.
Even though
what is more of an issue for us?
You've got to get elected to Parliament first, Matt.
We don't know what you would do because you weren't up front with the Queensland people beforehand. And so we don't, once again, we're in the same position we were 3 years ago. But 3 years ago, you said you wouldn't do a deal with the crossbenchers, and then you did.
Okay,
and you did.
Stephen Miles, Rick Williams, Billy Gordon, they were ALP members at the beginning of your last term. If you're on 47, you're like one MP away from minority government, a no deals minority government.
Well, and look, what we demonstrated through all of that is that we managed to maintain a stable government for 3 years. People said we wouldn't make 3 weeks. People said we wouldn't survive Billy Gordon moving to the crossbench, but we did, and we continued to pass our legislation. We continued to govern strongly. I think, going back to the in-doubt list from Anthony before, I went through those that Labor could win. There's one the LNP could win, and then that's, I think, Burdekin. Then you've got Hinchinbrook going to Katters, Morani maybe going to One Nation, Noosa being lost from LNP to an independent, and Rockhampton going from Labor to an independent. So there just isn't the seats there for the LNP to form government.
But further to Matt's point, if you only just have a majority, I guess you've just spent the last 3 years in minority government, and it was a steady as she goes approach. There was nothing particularly combative. The criticism was that not a lot happened under Labor. When you've got a bigger majority, I suppose you would have had more licence to really push ahead with some of your agenda. For example, the tree clearing laws. Do you still persist with that when you've only got a small majority?
Well, we were clear that when we had a majority, we would bring those laws back to the Parliament and we will pass them. We went to the election seeking a majority. I think we're going to get there. It might be a 1 or 2 or 3 or even more seat majority. We didn't go asking for a landslide, so we'll settle for whatever majority we can.
So you will be bold, you will, you know, drive the agenda that you said you wanted to do?
We took bold promises to the election. We did that last time too in 2015. We've implemented, I think, more than 550 or 580 of those election commitments. I think you'll see us do that again, work systematically through the things we said we would do and get them done. The land clearing laws that you point to, that's the only bill we were defeated on the floor of the Parliament on. We passed 180.
And just in the corner of the screen there, you can see that we're waiting for the LNP leader, Tim Nicholls, to emerge to tell us his thoughts on tonight's count. But Stephen Miles, while we're waiting, just give us a brief summary of what you think a second-term Anastasia Palaszczuk would be like compared to a first term.
Well, I think Anastasia as Premier will continue to be a Premier that listens, a Premier that travels the state a lot, a Premier that prioritises jobs. We created more than 130,000 jobs last term, 5 or 6 times the number that the Newman government created in its previous 3 years. So I think we took to this election a platform that will continue that work, and you'll see us systematically implementing it over 2 years and 10 months.
Is she going to listen to that big percentage of Queenslanders who have voted One Nation?
I will certainly listen to the Queenslanders who voted One Nation, but we won't be dealing with the One Nation MPs that they might elect. We saw during this campaign just how mad those candidates were. We saw some of the most outrageous claims and statements, including a bizarre press conference where One Nation said grade 4 girls were being taught to masturbate and put strap-ons on. That's the kind of people that Matt Canavan thinks Tim Nicholls should form a coalition with. Well, we're not going to do that.
So how do you listen to those 300,000 or however many thousand One Nation voters there are? What kind of things would Labor change to accommodate that, you know, large slice of the electorate?
Yeah, well, we'd continue to listen to them. We'd continue our program of regional community cabinets and town hall meetings, which are very effective at allowing us to listen to...
But you did all of those in the last 3 years.
Oh, we did, and the Labor vote has held up. The LNP vote has collapsed. I mean, that's what's happened here.
Not in the regions.
Oh.
Not in the regions.
Yeah, in the regions.
No, it hasn't, mate. You've had a swing away from you in the regions.
And half the size of your swing.
A swing. No, on a two-party preferred terms.
So,
Stephen, you've had a swing against you.
If you want to talk about
significant level.
If you want to talk about two-party preferred terms, we are sitting at 52% of the two-party preferred vote. That's a decisive victory in the statewide two-party preferred vote. It hasn't yet fallen that way, translated in terms of seats. I still think it will. I still think there's plenty of scope for that to happen.
All right, well, we are expecting Tim Nicholls to emerge very shortly to deliver his remarks to the party faithful. Just while we're waiting, Matt Canavan, obviously the electorate's been quite unpredictable across the nation. We've seen first-term governments turfed out, not just in Queensland. It's obviously not just a regional thing in Queensland then, so what's behind that?
Oh, look, I don't pretend to have all the answers, Matt, so I suppose what I say is I should have a disclaimer about this is my assessment.
World according to Canada.
World according to Matt, yeah. I do think it is, a lot of it is driven by the economic circumstances that have prevailed in Australia for the last decade. As I said earlier tonight, that's been most stark in regional areas in the last few years on the back of the mining downturn. However, right across the country, it's been slow wage growth since the global financial crisis. It's a phenomenon across the world, and it's led to pretty volatile political results in other countries as well, in my view. So we've got to recapture that ability to grow and deliver outcomes to people so they can see their standard of living get ahead, see that they can better look after their kids, give a better future for their children in the future. And in my view, the way we do that in this country is make investments, do things which create money and jobs and all those things. And I think we've held back from that in the last 10 years because we've been a bit cautious or don't have the vision to just do things, to build our nation.
We've seen a little bit of leadership speculation at the federal level. Today's events, does that fuel leadership speculation amongst the state LNP?
Well, you mean the state LNP leadership?
Exactly.
Oh, look, I think Tim's done a remarkable job to deliver this outcome.
Is it enough, though, to hang on as opposition
Well,
leader?
look, I'm not in that party room, but I would be astounded that a first-term opposition leader, let's say it's very rare to happen. I know it's been a bit more frequent recently, but it's a very tough ask to force a first-term government into the situation we see tonight, and Tim Nicholls has done that. And ultimately, in this game, like most games in life, you're judged on results, and Tim has delivered a fantastic result tonight in terms of seats. He's made this close. He's making the Labor Party sweat. Now, whether or not he gets there in the end is tough. It's a tough ask, but he has done something which very few opposition leaders do to a first-term government.
Anthony Chisholm, you are very used to discipline and taking disciplinary measures as your time as State Secretary. How do you maintain the discipline when you've only got a one-seat majority in 47 MPs?
Well, obviously the structure of the Labor Party is very important to that, and the fact that we do elect people as a caucus to carry out an agenda that the Labor Party have been fighting for 100 years. And I think that what we saw when we had 3 years of Nicholls and Newman is it really solidified the Labor Party like it hadn't been for a long time. So I've got no doubt that if it is only a thin majority, that we'll still have a united Labor caucus, and the Labor Party in Queensland has really been a united force since 1989. And I don't see that trademark changing in the next 3 years at all.
Except for the MPs that you lost in
Sorry?
the last 3 years.
Yeah, but I suppose that just emphasises that the ones who are there really stuck together and were able to get a result like they have tonight, where we're on the brink of getting a majority government. So for me, that just actually points to the fact that they will unite around each other and they will campaign. And the thing with Anastasia is she's very much a consensus leader, and I think that in an environment where you do have a small majority, that's really important because she does take people with her.
Jane Prentice, you've known Tim Nicholls for some time.
Have indeed.
How do you think he's going to respond to what obviously has been a disappointing campaign?
Well, I think it's been a good campaign. I think he and Deb have run a great campaign. I think he'll clearly be disappointed by the result.
Yeah.
And but he did do a campaign. He couldn't have asked more of him. I mean, he and Deb and the team were everywhere. They went out, covered the whole of Queensland, went to the hot spots, tackled the big issues. I think they did a great job. I don't think you could have asked for more.
How much did Labor's campaign to remind everybody of the public service job cuts and the privatisation plan, how much did that play out tonight, do you think?
Well, I think
particularly
negative campaigns always, the mud sticks, and Labor are absolute experts at negative campaigning. We only had to look at their Mediscare effort in the federal campaign, which was just lies.
But did Tim Nicholls do enough to get out from under that to distance himself from it?
Look, it's always hard, and I think Tim actually distanced himself from it instead, which I thought was better. Don't get down in the mud with them. My son always has a saying, don't argue with idiots because they drag you down to their level and beat you with experience. And I think Tim stayed out of that space, and I think he and Deb and the team ran a great campaign.
I think... sorry.
Yes, Matt?
Well, one thing, Matt, I think that Jane makes a good point is that some of the results, particularly in Brisbane, I think, go to the fact that the Labor Party, from the figures I've seen, outspent the LNP 2 to 3 to 1 here. They had the war chest from the trade union movement to do that. Fundraising was very difficult for the LNP, given the draconian laws that the Labor Party tried.
Accountability.
Retrospective laws to try and cap your political opponents.
Accountability and transparency.
Anyway, that's the way they play this game. And there was no doubt that some of the results are a reflection of the well-funded Labor campaign that the LNP just could not match in Brisbane. And it was very difficult always difficult to overhaul the large loss we had 3 years ago and the legacy of that. But pretty much everything the Labor Party spoke about for the last 4 weeks was about what happened 3 years ago, not what they want to do for the next 3 years. And the interesting thing now, given the situation the Labor Party finds themselves in, is how are they going to go into negotiations with independents or crossbenchers and say these are our plans? Because they've got no plans. Their plans is, we'll stop what Campbell Newman did 3 years ago, but he's gone.
Well, Matt Canavan, the other big feature of tonight's vote count is what we're seeing at the bottom of the screen there, 0 for One Nation Party.
Yeah, look,
that's surprised a lot of people because they were you know, getting so much publicity.
As I've said, it's an underwhelming night for One Nation. It's another disappointment for them in terms of electoral results.
We'll just interrupt you there, Senator Canavan, because we understand that Tim Nicholls, the opposition leader, the leader of the LNP, is about to walk into the LNP function being held at a hotel in Brisbane's inner city. Any moment now, we are told. He has been opposition leader only for about 18 months, having taken over from Lawrence Springborg in a leadership spill then. Lawrence Springborg, by the way, we're farewelling him too this evening. He has retired after a very long stint.
Might see him
in
back
politics.
again in the Senate, perhaps, Matt. What do you reckon?
Well, I've said before, I'd always welcome a contribution.
Is that on the
of
cards, do you
Lawrence.
think?
Oh, look, I mean, who knows? Who knows in politics? You don't make predictions.
Okay, well, here is Tim Nicholls.
With his wife Mary, and there's Deb Frecklington behind him, who was with us on the panel earlier, his deputy.
The crowd seems fairly upbeat. Labor was obviously ebullient as Anastasia Palaszczuk was making her way through the crowd. There's plenty of well wishes there for Tim Nicholls. 18 months as opposition leader, but been in Parliament for quite some time. Before that, was a Brisbane City Councillor before he was elevated into State Parliament in the seat of Clayfield. Of course, probably also well known as Treasurer during the Newman government. Copping a little bit of criticism early in the campaign as well from Campbell Newman, his former boss as Premier.
And Matt, he ran an action-packed campaign too, it has to be said. I mean, he's in a suit
I
and
didn't
tie
even know
tonight.
he was such an action man. Dirt bikes,
He was swimming in an aquarium with the fish.
roller
He was
coaster.
on roller coasters. Let's have a listen.
Well, firstly, let me say thank you all very much for your patience tonight. And let me say thank you, a big thank you to all of the people who have supported my team and myself over the last 18 months and over the last 4 weeks. And to Queenslanders, I particularly say thank you very much for the warm welcome that you've provided to me and my team as we have travelled the length and the breadth of the state in our efforts to deliver and to build a better Queensland for you and your families. What is abundantly clear is that tonight Queenslanders have voted to shake things up. And it's clear that the Premier has not won a majority in her own right. But let's be realistic, nor have we, and we must accept the will and the vote of the people of Queensland. But there are still over 360,000 postal votes to be counted over the coming days. Counting has now stopped and it will restart again at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Now, there are between 10 and 14 seats currently in doubt across Queensland, and those seats will determine the ultimate outcome of this election in 2017. And the result reflects what I have been saying all year, and that is that Queenslanders are frustrated with the same old politics. But importantly, Queenslanders have not responded to Labor and the union movement's scare campaign or their demand for a majority or nothing else. And I have always said that I understand your frustration, and that is why we committed to creating more and local jobs. And that is why we committed to cheaper power prices and to take action on the cost of living. And that is why we committed to stronger families and to safe and livable communities. And that is why, importantly, we committed to building the roads, the bridges and the dams that Queensland needs. And I still believe that that is what Queenslanders want. But we have to do more and we have to do better in selling the message that this is what the LNP and only the LNP can deliver for all of Queensland. Now, I've always said that I will respect the will and the vote of the people of Queensland, and I will keep my word on that respect. I will keep my word. The real question for tonight is, will Anastasia Palaszczuk keep her word? Will Anastasia Palaszczuk and Labor keep their word that they will do no deals with the One Nation Party, no deals with Qatar, no deals with independents, no deals with minor parties? That is the question for Anastasia Palaszczuk tonight. That was her promise. Let's be clear about what her promise was. The promise was no deals with the Qatars, no deals with the Greens, no deals with the minor parties and no deals with the independents. The question for Anastasia Palaszczuk is, will she keep her word? No. Now let me talk briefly about One Nation, because it is now clear, as I said and have been saying consistently, that One Nation preferences will elect Labor MPs. Friends of ours, people we know, love and respect, like Ian Walker, like Tanya Smith and Tracy Davis. Absolutely. Hard-working, dedicated, loyal to their constituents, look like they have lost their positions as a result of One Nation. Now, because of our positive campaign, because of the way we've conducted ourselves, because of the hope and optimism we have for Queensland, we will welcome, I believe, new MPs like Brent Mickelberg in Buderim, and Marty Hunt and Dan Purdy on the Sunshine Coast. I said at the start of this campaign, just on 27 days ago, that I wanted to restore hope and opportunity to Queensland, and my friends, nothing has changed. I still want to deliver hope and opportunity because I believe in Queensland, I believe in the future it offers, and we will continue to fight every day to deliver that hope and opportunity for all Queenslanders. And I give you this commitment. I won't give up on delivering a better Queensland for you and your families for generations to come. Now, we've all worked hard in this campaign. I couldn't have asked for more. But I do want to pay particular thanks to a few people tonight before I finish. Of course, to my wife Mary, who joins me here tonight. And experienced all the travails, the joys, the ups and the downs of life on the campaign trail. To my beautiful children, Katie, who's here, and Duncan, who has made it back from school, is in one piece. and my son Jeremy, thank you for your love and for your patience, putting up with a husband and a dad who's often not here, who's often not really listening too much to what's going on, but who loves you unconditionally nonetheless. To my mum and dad, Peter and Barbara, who have joined us here tonight, who raised me in a family which opened my eyes to the opportunity that could come to anyone here in this great state, and gave me every encouragement and supported me every step of the way, and who gave me the opportunities that I have so much enjoyed here in this state to do the things that I've done and to make the contributions that as a family we've made. I could never have done that without your help and support, and Dad was at the booth at 5 a.m. again this morning doing it. And my two sisters are here, and my sister and brother-in-law are here. When it comes to families, the LNP believes in families like no other party here in Queensland. I also have to pay a huge thanks to my deputy, Deb Frecklington. And I've got to apologise to her husband Jason and Elkie, who are here tonight. What was that? He's all right too. That's what Deb certainly tells me, so there you go. To them, for the absences that I've demanded and the team has demanded for Deb, thank you guys. It's been a tremendous effort. It has been truly a team effort in the LNP. And then, of course, there's the broader family of the LNP, to the President, Gary Spence, who has backed me with the VPs the whole way. To the unassuming but ever-effective Lincoln Folo, our campaign director. To Michael O'Dwyer, to all the team. To all the team at LNP headquarters, we ran a cracker of a campaign. Give yourselves a pat on the back. We ran a positive campaign, unlike our opponents and unlike the union movement, who had only fear, smear and no idea. We ran a campaign based on solving problems, on addressing people's frustrations and creating a brighter future for all our fellow Queenslanders. Thank you to all of you for all of your hard work, the long hours, the lousy food and the even worse pay. You did a great job. And talking of long hours, lousy food and bad pay, to my team in the Opposition Leader's office, to Gerard Benedette, my Chief of Staff, to Matty Jeffries, the Director of Policies, 100 policies. 100 plus policies, and no one could find anything wrong with them, and you bet they were looking to do it. To Matty Fines-Clinton, my Director of Communications, who writes all the glorious words, except not these ones that I'm using right now, Matty, for you. He wouldn't do it. And to Sean Rigby, who had me riding roller coasters, motorbikes, diggers, boats, tractors, every other form of motorised vehicular transportation available in Queensland, and made sure it all came together with great pics. To you, Sean, and to all the team, fantastic effort, and my advances particularly, they did a great job. But lastly, give yourselves a pat. But lastly, I want to say a big thanks to the members of the LNP, a party of 11,000 volunteers, not conscripts, not people who have been forced to sign up by the union movement, but people who believe in the values and the strength of the LNP and the future of Queensland, who manned the booths today, who got out there and manned the pre-poll booths, who handed out the how to vote cards, distributed the brochures and helped raise the money, not for us, the millions of dollars from the union movement, but for us, the hard work of everyday Queenslanders to deliver a better future for their Queenslanders. I say thank you. And again to my fellow Queenslanders, I say thank you. Thank you for the enormous privilege and the tremendous experience of being able to participate in the debate about the future of this state, to put forward our ideas to create jobs, to deliver cheaper power, to make sure you and your family can get ahead, to enjoy the hope and optimism that this great state has. I clearly believe in the future of Queensland, and I believe that Queensland's best days are ahead of it, and they will be ahead of it with an LNP team committed to your future. I won't let you down. We will deliver for Queensland. Thank you very much.
That's the LNP leader, Tim Nicholls, in opposition, but you wouldn't have known it from that speech. Very upbeat. He thanked the Queenslanders for their patience. It's been a long night tonight. Thanked the supporters, as well as paid tribute to some of his colleagues who have lost their seats tonight. Ian Walker, Tanya Smith and Tracy Davis, saying they lost on One Nation preferences. He did hint at perhaps one of the things that has gone wrong for him this campaign was that they just weren't selling their message well enough. But he says the real question is for Anastasia Palaszczuk. Is that will she keep her word? That if she doesn't form majority government in her own right, that there will be no deals. Well, we're coming to the end of, as Tim Nicholls leaves the building, the end of our broadcast. I want to get some final observations from our panel here. We'll start up with you, Senator Matt Canavan. It's been a big night. Yep, we're no closer to knowing who's going to be the Premier of Queensland. Well, we are not, and that's probably not where we thought we'd be at the start of the night. When we go back to the start when Anthony went through the state of play, Labor notionally had 48 seats, including a couple they expected to get back from independents. They're sitting on 43, so this is they have not met expectations tonight, the Labor Party. And I think you see from the speech there from Tim Nicholls, it's the LNP with momentum now because they've exceeded expectations. The rhetoric that we've had is we're always willing to respect the will of the people, whereas I think the Premier's in denial of reality at the moment a little bit, saying that she's going to get to a majority when that's not where the count indicates. And she's really put her future in the hands of now the postal ballots and counts, rather than looking at working for the best interests of Queensland, which I think that Tim Nicholls has done in his speech. Anthony Chisholm, a final observation?
I think that more than likely Anastasia will be able to form a majority government, and I think what we saw from Tim Nicholls is someone who's under leadership pressure, so he tried to put as much positive spin on it, and I think this federal result will also lead to leadership instability at the federal level as well. So I think we've seen that with the Nats already, with Senator O'Sullivan out there with the Banking Royal Commission bill. I think that we're going to see that play out in the Senate next week and then in the House of Reps the next 2 weeks after that. So that, I think, is the federal story out of this result tonight. Jane Prentice?
Look, there's no federal story out of tonight, but just as we saw Tim, Deb and the team run a positive, upbeat campaign, we saw Tim continue that tonight. I was surprised that he rode all sorts of motorised vehicles except a skateboard, thank goodness, because that wasn't too good last time. No, I think Tim and Deb have run a great campaign. I think we'll see changes to the results we've seen tonight over the next few days as the pre-poll and postal votes come in. Let's not forget some of those votes were cast over a week ago, so it could be quite a difference to some of the results we have tonight. And Stephen Miles.
Well, I think that speech from Tim Nicholls was just delusional. He blamed their inability to sell their policies. Well, he's the chief salesperson. I don't see how he survives what is a terrible result for the LNP Here, in contrast, I think Labor ran a strong, united campaign under Anastasia Palaszczuk. The unions and the party worked incredibly.
Well, if he's disappointed, he's not looking like it. Look at him, he's laughing, he's
that's
getting
why I say
hugs.
it's delusional. I mean, Anthony makes the point that he's preparing for the wagons that are circling for his leadership, and I think that's probably right. I think the final point is we haven't really come back properly to this question of how federal issues played in, and my sense is that whenever I was door knocking and I said to someone, what do you think about politics these days, they'd say Canberra's a mess. The Turnbull government's a mess. And I think the only way we're going to break through that is when we have a federal election to deal with this citizenship crisis and everything else. But clearly Turnbull's not going to do that because he knows what the result would be.
All right, well, this is where we might have to bid you all adieu because we are coming to the end of our broadcast. But first, we'd obviously like to thank all of you for your time. Senator Matt Canavan and Senator Anthony Chisholm, thanks very much for crunching the numbers for us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
And Stephen Miles and Jane Prentice. I didn't think we'd be broadcasting beyond what we did in 2015, but it is after 11 o'clock now. We've been going for over 5 hours.
Well done,
I do
everyone.
appreciate your efforts this evening.
And if we haven't called out your seat, well, stay tuned because we're going to go through our traditional call of the board where we list all 93 seats. So strap in and we're going to start with Algester.
And Leanne Enoch has been re-elected there. She's had a swing of about 4% towards her. That's the Minister for Innovation, Science, Digital Economy and Small Business has been re-elected in Algester.
To Aspley in northern Brisbane where Tracy Davis seems to have lost her seat.
She has been defeated. She's ahead on first preferences, but there's a substantial vote for the Greens and One Nation. The loss of votes to One Nation haven't come back as preferences. Swing of 5.4% and Bart Mellish. Anthony Chisholm loses his Chief of Staff and Bart Mellish becomes the member for Aspley.
Now to one of the new seats, Bancroft.
Chris Whiting moves to this seat from Marumba. He's got a small swing against him, but he's comfortably won this seat, which is quite safe for the Labor Party. 19% there for One Nation.
To Barron River in northern Cairns.
A very low first preference vote for Labor, with just under 34% there. But there's 12% with the Greens, and the One Nation preferences are clearly not disciplined. So Craig Crawford, who defeated Michael Trout in 2015, defeats him again and is re-elected in Barron River.
OK, now down to the Gold Coast, another new seat, Bonnie.
This one on looks like it's been retained by the LNP. Sam O'Connor up against Rowan Holtzberger. Early on, the figures look good for the Labor Party, but pre-polls, when they've come in, have really sort of firmed up the LNP position. It looks like Sam O'Connor will be the new member for Bonnie.
Staying on the Gold Coast to Broadwater, where David Crisafulli was looking to make a political comeback.
He certainly has. He's got a 3.6% swing to him. This is one of the safer of the Gold Coast seats. And he's been easily elected in that seat. 22% there for One Nation, which is quite a high vote for them on the Gold Coast.
OK, up to the Sunshine Coast now, and one of the high-profile seats, Spudderham.
And one of the high-profile defeats with Steve Dixon. Steve Dixon's defeated. He switched party to One Nation, but he's second there in Labor preferences. Will elect Brent Mickelberg as the new LNP member for Spudderham.
To Bulimba in inner southern Brisbane.
And here, Di Farmer, she lost it in 2012, won it back in 2015. She's got 49.5 there. Again, Green, 13%. They did quite well in many of the inner city electorates.
To the Wide Bay and Bundaberg.
And this is an LNP gain. Leanne Donaldson really was elected last time because of preference flows. Those preference flows aren't there this time. Her first preference vote, let me see, first preference vote is roughly the same as last time, but she couldn't win from that position with One Nation polling so well.
Jetting across to eastern Ipswich, Bundamba and the sitting ALP member Joanne Miller.
53.8% for Joanne Miller. 14.5 for Patrick Herbert. Joanne Miller's easily won this. He's a very safe Labor seat and a bit of a vote there for some other independents, but Joanne Miller's easily returned in Bundamba.
Here's one that's had us scratching our heads tonight, Burdekin.
Look, it's still scratching my head. If you look at the percentages there, Labor's behind. Now, what's to come? There's Moranbah, Middlemount, Collinsville and Claremont pre-polls, which are all mining towns. So the Labor vote will increase, but even if they get into the second place, Dale Last would still win, I suspect, on those numbers. So Dale Last had to overcome the redistribution to win, but has been re-elected. He was first elected at the last election.
To Burleigh on the southern Gold Coast, where the LNP's Michael Hart is.
And he's won. He's had a small... I'm trying to see if I get the swing up here. Come on. Swing, 1% swing to the Labor Party. Michael Hart's easily re-elected there. He's just under 50% of the first preference vote.
OK, the seat that surrounds Bundaberg, Burnett.
Yeah, and Burnett, Stephen Bennett will win because the Labor Party slipped third place here. Though later in the... it may yet be the case that One Nation falls to third, but either way, Stephen Bennett would be re-elected in Burnett.
Right up to the north in Cairns, a traditionally Labor stronghold.
Yeah, and Robert Pine left the Labor Party. He's got 20% of the vote in his own right, but Michael Healy will win. So some very low first preference votes there, of course, but the preference count we get has Labor winning that easily, and Michael Healy is the new member for Cairns.
We'll be calling a new name for the first time in a long time here, Callide.
Yeah, Jeff Seeney retired. Colin Boyce is ahead on first preferences, a high vote for One Nation, but Labor's preferences will get Colin Boyce over the line. We've got a... no, we're not getting a preference count, but Colin Boyce should win that. I'd expect the Katter's Australia Party vote and the One Nation vote to decline through the rest of the count, as should the Labor. The LNP normally does very well with postals in an electorate like that.
And Anthony has Mark McArdle hung on in Caloundra.
Yes, he's had a swing against him of about 2.5%, but he still holds on. He's got quite a vote there for One Nation, 22%. Mark McArdle's been easily returned, though.
Going to take a little run through the eastern suburbs of Brisbane here, Capalaba.
Yeah, there's some talk of One Nation potentially picking this seat up, but they got nowhere near it. They got 19%, still finished third, and Don Brown, who won this seat back for Labor at the last election, has a small swing to him to be re-elected in Capalaba.
Chatsworth was a marginal seat.
Yeah, some early figures looked promising for the Labor Party, but then once we got the more substantial booths in, the figures firmed up for Steve Minikin, who was one of the few LNP's members elected in 2012 who didn't lose his seat in 2015. And he's actually maintained his hold on the seat and is re-elected, defeating Paul King from the Labor Party for the second time.
And next up is the seat of the opposition leader, Clayfield.
And like a lot of northern Brisbane, he's had a swing against him of about 5 or 6%, but it's a safe LNP seat, and Tim Nichols has been easily re-elected.
Let's go to the farming area of the Darling Downs and the seat of Condamine.
Another seat where Labor preferences have elected an LNP member, Pat Weir, 40.5, One Nation second, but the Labor candidate who famously the Premier couldn't remember his name, and I won't try and pronounce.
Toybretts.
Thank you. And but Pat Weir has been easily re-elected there.
OK, up to Cape York and Cook.
Yeah, and this is firmed up for Labor through the evening. The Labor vote, Cynthia Louis, up to 39%. She'll probably be able to hang on from there. So when she was down around 31, 32% earlier in the count, it didn't look good. And one of the polling places to come is Bamaga, which is a very strong Labor vote booth. So I think that should hold up for the Labor Party. But we've still got it in doubt, but Cynthia Louis would be better positioned there.
All the way back down to the southern end of the state to Coomera on the Gold Coast. How's Michael Crandon placed?
He's been re-elected. He's had a 2.5% swing against him, but he's been comfortably returned in the end in Coomera.
And an atypically quiet night for Kate Jones in Cooper.
Yes, this is the old Ashgrove, and of course the Campbell Newman-Kate Jones battle of the last two elections has been a dominant topic of discussion, where we've barely heard of Kate Jones as contestant this time, and she's had a 7.5% swing to her and got a margin up above 10%, but an easy victory there for Kate Jones. 21% for the Greens in an area where they traditionally do well.
And Anthony, has Jan Stuckey held on in Currumbin?
She's had 2.5% swing against her, but no, she's elected 47% for Jan Stuckey, and she's been elected in that electorate. I'm just not sure if our graphics are moving on at the moment.
There we go.
There we go. So Jan Stuckey's been re-elected there, 11% for the Greens, and easily re-elected.
Maybe I should start talking slower. We're going to Everton now. Tim Mander, a leadership hopeful, you would reckon?
Yeah, and he's had a very good result. He's increased his margin by 3.8%, which is quite at odds with all the surrounding electorates. Significant is no One Nation candidate in this electorate, and it may be that the presence of a One Nation candidate has caused the drift of preferences away from the LNP. With only a Labor and a Green candidate there, maybe the LNP vote was firmer, or maybe Tim Mander is just a wonderful local member, or there's a variety of reasons there, but certainly that's one of the best LNP results in Brisbane for Tim Mander there in Everton.
To another Brisbane seat, Ferny Grove, where Nick Elston was trying to defeat Mark Ferner.
And this is one of the narrowest Labor wins last time, but the margin was increased by the redistribution, and Mark Ferner's held it up. He's led on first preferences this time. He won from behind last time. Big vote there for the Greens with 16%, but in the end, Mark Ferner easily returned.
OK, down to the Gold Coast again, and Gavin.
This one's in doubt at the end of the night. Sid Cramp is on 46.4. There's enough Green votes there to put Megan Scanlon in the lead at the end on the results, but that's just too close. That's close to call, but that's one that Labor can win. It will depend on the rest of the count in that electorate. We've got all the pre-poll centres counted tonight on first preferences. We haven't got them on two-party preferred, but at the moment it's trending towards Labor on 50.2. So that one is one of the few two-party contests in doubt.
All right, to Glasshouse in the Sunshine Coast hinterland.
We got Gladstone
We're
first.
just ahead, yeah.
Glenn Butcher easily returned there. That was the one he won at the last election with the retirement of Liz Cunningham, and he's easily retained that seat. And as expected, One Nation finished second.
And Glasshouse were really interested earlier on in the fate of Andrew Powell. What's happened?
Yeah, early on it looked bad for him, but actually what's interesting here is how well One Nation has done in that electorate. There's also 12% for the Greens. But from 34%, Andrew Powell goes on to win. He's got about a 1.5% swing to him after preferences. But Andrew Powell has retained Glasshouse after almost being defeated last time.
Let's go to Greenslopes. Has Joseph Kelly been returned for a second term?
I haven't looked at this all night. 5% swing to Labor. And Joe Kelly has been re-elected. He's got a 10% margin after the election. So he's defeated Ian Kay, the man he defeated at the last election.
Another seat we haven't really gone to tonight, Gregory.
Yeah, there was some of these seats in Western Queensland. There was some talk about the LNP could lose them. One Nation has finished second, but with Labor finishing third, preferences get Lachlan Miller back over the line.
One Nation was expected to poll well in Gympie, Anthony.
And they have polled well, but once again, Labor preferences will ensure that Tony Perrott has no difficulty getting re-elected in Gympie. He's back in the Parliament with One Nation again finishing second. That's one of the higher One Nation votes in the election.
And just up the Bruce Highway at Harvey Bay.
And this remained as a two-party contest in the end because One Nation finished third here. And there's basically no swing in this electorate. Ted Sorensen has been re-elected with roughly the same vote he had at the last election.
To Hill now, this is one of the Qatar seats.
Yes, and Shane Canute has been easily elected there. He's got 47% of the vote. The LNP second, and Shane Canute will hold the new seat of Hill. Of course, he's represented part of this electorate as member for the abolished seat of Dalrymple. The new seat of Hill's fashion was more marginal, but he's got a swing of about 15% towards him.
A little bit more uncertain in Hinchinbrook, though.
Yeah, Andrew Cripps is in difficulty. He's only got 29.9% of the vote. The Labor preferences will favour Katter's Australia Party, which gets them ahead of One Nation. And so Katter's Australia Party have a real chance of winning that electorate from third place. But really, we'll just have to wait for more counting. I'm not sure where the votes that are yet to be counted are from, but that's 79% counted. So that's a real struggle for Andrew Cripps to win that seat.
No such struggle for the Premier in her own seat of Inala.
No, it's a very safe seat and she's held it comfortably. She's taken her two-party preferred vote back towards 75%. So Anastasia Palaszczuk easily elected.
OK, let's go out to Ipswich.
Well, One Nation got to second place in Ipswich, but they didn't force the Labor vote down far enough. And Jennifer Howard has been re-elected with 48% of the vote.
And the neighbouring electorate of Ipswich West.
Well, this is, I should have mentioned in Ipswich, of course, Malcolm Roberts was the defeated One Nation candidate. Jim Madden won this at the last election and he's easily been re-elected. He's kept his first preference vote at 48%, so he can't be defeated even though One Nation finished second.
And just up at Jordan, another new seat.
I've forgotten the pronunciation. Charisse. It's getting a very long night. 40% of the first preference vote, but she will win because there's no clear second candidate there. We're estimating she's got a margin of 10% after the distribution of preferences.
To Kawana on the Sunshine Coast, how did Jared Blahey go?
He's got a swing to him. He's increased his majority. He's back up to a margin of 13%. He's got just under 56% of the first preference vote.
How about Keppel and Brittany Lauger?
One Nation did move into second place in this electorate, but just having a look here. I hadn't looked at these numbers all night. This will be a little bit close. I haven't looked at this. She will win. I think Brittany Lauger will win from 42.7%. There'd have to be a very strong flow of LNP preferences to One Nation there, and there's some Greens there. So I think that would be that will remain a Labor seat. So Brittany Lorga should be back in Keppel.
Kawongba, this seat used to be known as Kalanga.
And Shane King has been re-elected. He won this at the last election and has basically maintained his vote. And again, a 20% vote for One Nation, which is there's quite a bit of that on that northern edge in the Caboolture corridor north of Brisbane.
Well, here's a seat that One Nation really wanted to pick up, Lockyer.
And this was their biggest vote. This was the highest vote at the election, 35%, against Jim McDonald, 35.4%. But Labor's preferences elect Jim McDonald, who succeeds Ian Rickus as the member for Lockyer.
And One Nation had high hopes in Logan too.
But they were stymied by the LNP directing preferences to Labor. Linus Power's vote fell to 43%. He probably would have held on anyway, but the LNP preferences in fact produced a swing to him of 2%.
OK, Lytton.
Joan Peace, I think it is. She's been re-elected in that electorate. And this is Tom Burns' old seat. It's a very safe Labor electorate and rarely leaves the Labor fold.
A very crowded contest in McAllister around Beenleigh, south of Brisbane. Who's come out on top?
We've left this slightly in doubt just simply because Hetty Johnson is 2.2% behind the LNP candidate, and if she gets into second place, she benefits from lots of other preferences. I suspect in the end, with postals and absence to come, that Hetty Johnson's vote will decline from there, and so this will probably be a victory for Labor's Melissa McMahon.
OK, right to the centre of Brisbane now, McConnell.
My computer decided to go alphabetical rather than the Scottish alphabetical, so let me get through to McConnell. McConnell, Jamie Forster, 35%, Grace 34%, Kirsten Lovejoy, just under 29%. Green preferences elect Grace as the member for McConnell.
Mackay in North Queensland.
Mackay has been held by Julianne Gilbert, who won this at the last election. She's got 43% of the vote, so she's easily returning the traditionally safe Labor seat of Mackay.
OK, to another one of the ones in doubt, Maiwar.
Yeah, I don't think it's only in doubt because it's unclear whether it's a Labor or a Green victory. Scott Emerson has been defeated on those numbers. It's just unclear whether it will be the Greens' Michael Berkman or Labor's Ali Breeze-King who'll win that seat. And it'll be the vote of those, the counting of those votes still to come that will determine that gap. You'll know there's only 61% counted. There's a whole bunch of pre-polls from Brisbane City Council and some other areas still to come. And there's usually a big postal vote in that seat.
And another significant figure in the LNP with Ian Walker in strife in Mansfield.
And he has been defeated. He's behind on first preference, which is a big vote there for the Greens. And so Corinne McMillan is the new member for Mansfield. The notional margin was it made it a marginal Labor seat, and Ian Walker couldn't overcome the redistribution with a swing to the Labor Party.
And Maroochydore.
This is Fiona Simpson's seat. She's been re-elected. She's had a bit of a vote there for One Nation. It votes 44% on first preferences, but she easily wins that after the distribution of preferences. And it's Fiona Simpson returned.
A little bit further north to Maryborough.
This is a good result for Bruce Saunders. He won this very near, with only 25% of the vote last time. He's got 45% this time. And even though the LNPs finished third, their preferences are not flowing strongly enough to defeat Bruce Saunders. So he's held on to Maryborough, which is one of the more notable Labor retains outside of the southeast.
And back to the Gold Coast, Mermaid Beach.
A very safe seat, which has been held by Ray Stevens. There was a number of votes there for some independents who haven't been able to coalesce their vote together, and Ray Stevens has been returned as the member for Mermaid Beach.
Off to Miller.
This is the old Eurong Pilly, Mark Bailey. He's the Minister for Main Roads, Road Safety, etc. He's got 38.5, big vote for the Greens. Another one of those inner city electorates where they've polled well, and those preferences ensure that there's a 3% swing to Labor after preferences in Miller.
OK, to Jim Pearce's fate in Morani.
I would think it's, yes, it looks like it's been sealed. We don't have a preference count. No, this is a really hard one. I'm pretty sure Kerry Latter's preferences from the LNP will get Stephen Andrew ahead of Jim Pearce. And so that looks like it could be the One Nation gain at this election. And it's the best chance they have of winning at this election.
To Moggill, it's always been in Conservative hands. I assume that's continuing to...
And it continues. I mean, this was the only LNP seat in Brisbane for 3 elections at the start of the century. So Christian Rowan's been easily returned there.
And Morayfield.
46.9, Mark Ryan, Minister for Police, Fire and Emergency Services. He's been re-elected there, 46.9. One Nation finishing second on 25%, again, in that Caboolture corridor where One Nation has always polled well.
To Mount Omni, this is another one of those ALP gains from the LNP.
Yeah, it's a redistributed seat, so it was notionally theirs anyway, but they've now overturned the position of Tanya Smith. There's a 6% swing to Labor there, and Jessica Pugh, having lost narrowly last time, returns and wins that seat. A big drop in the vote for the LNP there.
How did Ros Bates go down at Mudgeeraba on the Gold Coast?
She's been re-elected, a tiny swing to the Labor Party, but Ros Bates has got 46% of the vote and is easily returned there.
Mulgrave held by the Treasurer, Curtis Pitt.
Yes, and he's easy. Who would remember that his father lost to One Nation back in, was defeated by One Nation back in 1998. And Curtis Pitt's 48.4, he's easily won that seat. Doesn't matter who finishes second there, he will still win that seat. It's substantially moved into the Cairns metropolitan area. So the Treasurer and Minister for Trade and Investment has been returned there in Mulgrave.
And Mundingburra.
And at the end of the night, this one is firmed up for the Labor Party. If you look at the count here, if Katter's Australia Party preferences can flow to One Nation, they can get ahead of the LNP and would probably benefit. But the gap there is about 9% now between second and third. And I don't think there'll be enough of a preference flow to overturn that gap, which means the LNP finishes second and the preference flows we're getting for that count deliver victory to Coralie Rourke with a swing of about 1.5% to her. So we've now got Mundingburra as a Labor retain, which is where the 43rd seat came from in the seat count at the bottom of the screen.
To Marumba in the Caboolture corridor.
And Stephen Miles, our guest tonight, he's been easily returned. He's got a 3.5% swing to him after preferences.
And ABC panellist and Deputy Opposition Leader Deb Frecklington in Anango.
Yeah, and One Nation did finish second here, but Deb Frecklington's personal vote, she's up to nearly 47% there. So she's easily retained that seat. There was some sort of rather strange comments early in the campaign when Ben Rankin was named as a Labor candidate and people were talking about him being a challenger in Nanango. And it was never really on, and he's finished in third place there.
To Nicklin, where the independent MP Peter Wellington has retired after almost 2 decades in politics.
And his retirement has led Marty Hunt to be the new member. He's a sergeant in charge of the Nambour PCYC, and he's got 32% of the vote, but with One Nation in third place, he goes on to win that seat. There was enough preferences flowing towards him. We've got a preference count, Labor versus LNP, and he's got a swing 55.6 after preferences.
OK, one of our other new seats, Ninderry, around Deception Bay.
Dan Purdy is another... I think he's a detective senior sergeant up on the Sunshine Coast. Again, he's on 36.5. The One Nation preferences favour him, and we've got a preference count there, and it's about 57.3 after preferences. So the first member for Ninderry is Dan Purdy.
To Noosa now and Anthony, probably one of the surprise results tonight.
Well, this was hinted at beforehand, and it's happened. Sandra Bolton, 32%, Glen Elms, 29.5%. And we've got the counts up to 76% now, so it's hard to see how they can possibly turn around. There's strong flows of preferences from the Greens and from Labor and other independents towards Sandra Bolton, so you'd expect that she will go on to win that seat.
All right, let's get the latest figures from Nudgee.
Leonard, thank you. It's a very long night. 53.3%, so she's easily held on to that seat. It's a safe Labor seat. It was lost briefly in 2012, but no difficulty there.
Oodgeroo in the Redlands.
One of the renamed electorates after Oodgeroo Noonuckle, or Kath Walker, the famous Australian poet, who was born in the electorate on the Indigenous colony on Stradbroke Island, yes. Mark Robinson's been easily re-elected there. He's got a small swing to him, and he's held on to that seat. It used to be known as Cleveland, and he's won it for the last 2 elections and adds a third today. How did it go in Pine Rivers? Nikki Boyd has been returned there. Now, it's quite a low first preference vote for Labor at 37%, but after preferences, the Labor vote still goes up, and Nikki Boyd has been returned there.
To Pumicestone, where Rick Williams, a former Labor MP, was dumped and ran as an independent.
I think this is in doubt at the end of the night. Michael Hogwarts, or Hogwarts, you keep wanting to say that, you know, it's like the magician. 36.3, the LNP 29.4, One Nation on 23. He was further ahead earlier, and it's narrowed substantially. And we've got, on those first preferences, he's in trouble, and we haven't got a preference count from the all district centres and from Palmerston returning officer. They will presumably come tomorrow morning and confirm whether he's ahead or behind. But I've got that as a likely ALP game, but I'm certainly not giving that one away.
And now a repeat matchup in Redcliffe.
Yes, Kerry-Anne Dooley's run several times. I think she's won 3 times as the LNP candidate and once or twice as Family First before. But Yvette Darth has had a small swing against her. 3.7% swing, but she's easily been re-elected in the end there with 45.7% of the vote, one of the few real two-party contests. There seems to be some difference whether there's a One Nation candidate or not and the impact it has on the LNP vote.
Redlands a very marginal seat. Has the LNP's Matt McGeechan managed to hang on?
Yeah, yes, he has. No, he's lost. Sorry, just to clarify that. Kim Richards will win. Jason Quirk. We've got Peter Dowling, the former member who's directed preferences against the LNP. We've got a preference count there, and the swing is 6%. And so Kim Richards will be the new Labor member for Redlands.
And another boil over here, Rockhampton.
Yeah, and at the end of the night, we got 79% counted, and there are the first preferences. And on those numbers, I would expect that Margaret Strelo will win that seat because she'll get enough preferences from all the other candidates on the ballot paper to pull ahead of Labor. It may well depend on absence and postals, which independents are usually very poor at organising. But with 79% counted, there wouldn't be a huge number of votes left to count, but they will tend to favour Labor, I think.
Sandgate in northern Brisbane.
Sterling Hinchliffe has been easily re-elected there. 3% swing towards him, and he holds Sandgate.
And out to the scenic rim.
And One Nation did finish second here, and Labor preferences will ensure that John Krause increases his majority because his first preference vote has taken a hit, but it returns after preferences from Labor.
To South Brisbane and the Deputy Premier Jackie Trad facing a strong challenge from the Greens.
Yes, and on the count at the end of the night, Jackie Trad has moved back into first place on 36.1, Amy McMahon 35.9, Simon Quinn on 22.8. There was a poll in the campaign, and I think there were 2 polls, both indicating that the Greens would win. The preference flows on the harder vote from the LNP were to Labor, and clearly lots of voters have filled in their preferences that way because Jackie Trad pulled substantially ahead. At the end of the count, she's got 53.5. She may have about 52.5 after the rest of us are counted, but it's a big hit against her, but she has held on, thanks to the LNP.
Now, this next seat, you've been calling the one name for the last, every election you've done since 1989, but it's going to be a new one this time. Lawrence Springborg's finally retiring. Yes, he was elected in 1989 at my first election as a 21-year-old, and he's now retiring, how many years is later, 28 years later. And I'm still going. And look, the new member is James Lister, who is recruited for the party as a former RAAF officer. One Nation's finished second. Robert McKenzie was an independent, was a member of the LNP that was overlooked for its selection, but it's remained with the LNP.
To Southport on the Gold Coast.
I think it's Rob Mulhook has been re-elected there. He's 45.8. Swing, virtually no swing in that election, so he's maintained that election. It was certainly safer after the redistribution with the creation of the more marginal Bonnie next door.
OK, what about Springwood?
There's been a 2.5% swing towards Labor. Mick de Brenn is elected. The Minister for Housing and Public Works and Minister for Sport has been returned as a member for Springwood.
To Stafford, where the Minister for State Development, Anthony Lynham, is the MP.
And he's had an increase in his vote by about 4%. He's got 48.8 on the first preferences, and after preferences, nearly 63%. So Anthony Lynham's easily re-elected.
And how about Duncan Pegg in Stretton?
He's got about a 5% swing towards him, and he's easily returned. He's got over 50% of the first preference vote. He defeated Freya Ostapovich, who was the former member for the seat that he defeated at the last election.
No problems for John Paul Langbrook in Surfers Paradise?
No, a very safe seat, 63% of the first preference vote, and he's had no difficulty holding on to Surfers Paradise.
OK, the other new Gold Coast seat, Theodore.
Mark Boothman, who's the member for Albert, has switched to run in Theodore with the abolition of Albert. He's had a 3% swing against him, but at the end of the night, our figures are showing that he'll probably have about 2% as a margin afterwards. But a big vote for One Nation there, but doesn't upset Mark Boothman's hold on Theodore.
To Thuringowa, and where has the ALP's Aaron Harper landed in the end?
I still think, look, this depends on who finishes second. The LNP preferences were towards the Labor Party. And on that, and we've got a preference count for Labor versus One Nation, and Labor would win. But if One Nation doesn't get into second spot, then the preferences of the third parties would flow to the LNP, and I still think Labor would win. But it's winning from a very low vote with a lot of preferences floating around.
Okay, now to the outer southern suburbs of Brisbane and Toohey.
Peter Russo has won that with a margin, swing to him of about 2%, so he's easily held that seat. It was called Sunnybank, it's now called Toohey.
To Toowoomba North, we haven't looked at this one yet tonight.
No, it's sort of not much happened in the end because there was a 3% swing to the LNP. Trevor Watts defeated Kerry Shine. Kerry Shine having another attempt to win back the seat he used to hold last decade, but he hasn't won, and Trevor Watts has returned as a member for Toowoomba South.
And Toowoomba North?
Toowoomba North, sorry.
What about Toowoomba South?
David Janetsky, who won it at the by-election, has basically maintained his vote from the last election. From the by-election, from the last state election, has been returned as a member for Toowoomba South. Back
up to Townsville and the seat of Townsville.
Yes, and this actually might give us a guide towards what's happening in neighbouring electorates because the One Nation preferences are not flowing strong enough to allow the Liberals to close, the LNP to close that gap there. So Scott Stewart wins. He's got about 51% after preference, 53% after preferences. So clearly there isn't a big flow of preferences towards the Labor Party, though there is a substantial Green vote there. So and Lindy Collins was a campaigner against the development, the coal mining development in central Queensland, whose name of Adani. So
how could you forget?
I didn't have to cover it every day.
All right, let's go to Traeger.
And Rob Catt is easily elected in that seat. He's got something like 64% of the first preference vote. Labor's got into second spot there, and the LNP to third. So Rob Katz is easily returned in that electorate.
To the vast southern outback electorate of Warrego. How's Anne Leigh placed?
And there was some talk that they could lose the seat to Katter's Australia Party, but Katter's Australia Party has finished third. Robert Lachlan and Mark O'Brien's finished second, and Anne Leigh's easily won that seat.
Okay, down to the Logan area and Waterford,
where Shannon Fentiman has been easily re-elected in that electorate. One Nation has finished second, but still no difficulties there for Labor holding that seat.
Whitsunday in North Queensland?
This was one that there was some interest in, but in the end, the major party vote is they're both down under 30%. But the preferences are heavily favouring Jason Costigan, who holds his lead and has been re-elected with a swing of about 1.5% to 2% towards him.
And last but not least, Woodridge.
And Woodridge, Cameron Dick, the health minister, has been re-elected there. It's a very safe seat, and he's got 66% of the first preference vote there, and easily returned in that electorate.
There you have it. That's 93 seats. Anthony Green, thank you so much for your call tonight, steering us through what is a very complex set of events.
Yes.
No election would be complete without you, obviously, or the same.
And we'll see if this parliament lasts 3 years. There's another week or two of counting to come, and we'll find out in a while. The polls have probably slightly overestimated Labor and Green vote and slightly underestimated the LNP and One Nation vote. So this result isn't quite as clear-cut as the polls are indicating.
Sounds like we're going to rely on your expertise for at least the next few days to come.
Thank you.
Don't catch the plane.
No.
All fun and games. All right, and that's where we're going to leave Queensland Votes 2017. Anastasia Palaszczuk is confident she'll keep her job, but Tim Nicholls is not conceding defeat just yet. And as you heard, One Nation may not have picked up a seat just yet, maybe just one. But this election result is far from certain tonight, with no one able to claim that magic number of 47 seats.
Thank you for watching and listening, and remember, insiders will dissect all the results tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, and we'll also have comprehensive coverage on our news channel, ABC Radio, and of course ABC News Online. I'm Jessica Van Vonderen.
And I'm Matt Wordsworth. You've been watching Queensland Votes.